What if Luffy formed a Yonko alliance with Blackbeard, Shanks, and Buggy to invade Marine headquarters? Look, I know it sounds crazy. These four can barely be in the same room without someone trying to kill someone else. But imagine the world government creating a weapon so terrifying that it forces natural enemies to work together. We're talking about a cosmic threat that makes Kaido look like a warm-up boss. Picture this. Ancient aliens, space battles, marines and pirates fighting side by side, and Luffy literally punching his way through an orbital weapons platform. It's the kind of story where everything you thought you knew about One Piece gets flipped upside down. If you're ready for some absolutely wild storytelling, let's jump in. The morning sun cast blood-red shadows across Marineford's rebuilt towers, but Admiral Akainu barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the classified reports spread across his desk, pages that would reshape the world if their contents ever leaked. Operation Crimson Dawn, he muttered, tracing a finger along the document's seal. 20 years of planning, countless resources, and now, finally within reach. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Vice Admiral Doberman stepped through the door, his scarred face grim. "Sir, the final preparations are complete. The weapon will be ready within 48 hours. Akainu's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on anyone else. On him, it looked predatory. "Good, and the targets?" "All four confirmed, sir. Monkey D. Luffy on Laugh-Tail's approach route, Marshal D. Teach in his territory near Hachinosu, red-haired Shanks somewhere in the New World, and..." Doberman paused, clearly uncomfortable with the next name. "Buggy the Clown has been located at Karaibari Island." "Perfect." Akainu stood, magma beginning to drip from his fist. "In 2 days, the age of the Yonko ends forever. 3,000 miles away, Monkey D." Luffy was having what he considered a perfect morning. The Thousand Sunny sailed through calm waters, Sanji had made extra meat for breakfast, and they were only a day away from reaching Laugh-Tail. Again. Luffy, Nami's voice cut through his post-meal contentment. "There's something weird on the transponder snail network. Someone's trying to reach all the Yonko at once." That got his attention. Luffy bounded over to where Nami stood beside their communication equipment, the snail looking particularly confused. "Put it through," he said. The voice that crackled through was instantly recognizable, though Luffy hadn't heard it in years. "If you're listening to this, it means I've managed to patch into all 4 territories simultaneously, which frankly is more impressive than it sounds." "Shanks," Luffy grinned, then his expression grew serious. His former mentor wouldn't contact everyone like this unless something was terribly wrong. "I need all of you to listen carefully," Shanks continued, his usual laid-back tone replaced by urgency. "The world government has developed something called Operation Crimson Dawn. In approximately 47 hours, they plan to use an ancient weapon, not Pluton, not Poseidon, something else, to simultaneously eliminate all 4 Yonko and their crews." The crew had gathered around now, their faces reflecting Luffy's own shock. Even Zoro had opened his eyes. "I know what you're thinking," Shanks' voice pressed on. "Why tell you this? Why not just run? Because running won't work this time. This weapon, it can track us anywhere in the world. There's nowhere to hide." Brook's usual cheerful demeanor had vanished entirely. "Yo-ho-ho, this is quite serious indeed. The only way to survive this is to destroy the weapon before they can use it. But it's housed in the new Marineford, protected by the full strength of Marine headquarters, all 3 admirals, and God knows what else. None of us could take that alone." A pause. "But together. Together we might have a chance." Luffy felt his jaw clench. The world government wanted to kill his crew, his friends, everyone he cared about. The familiar rage began building in his chest, but underneath it was something else, cold calculation. He'd learned over the years that some problems needed more than just punching. "I'm proposing a temporary alliance," Shanks continued. "I know it sounds crazy. I know we've all got history, some of it bad. But if we don't work together, we'll all die separately. Meet me at the coordinates I'm about to transmit in 18 hours. All of us need to be there." The transmission cut to static, then silence. "Captain," Robin spoke quietly. "What are you thinking?" Luffy stared at the now-quiet transponder snail for a long moment. His crew, his family, watched him with absolute trust, waiting for his decision. He thought about Ace, about Marineford, about all the times the world government had tried to hurt the people he loved. "Nami," he said finally, "change course for those coordinates. We're going to meet with the other Yonko. Even Blackbeard," Usopp's voice squeaked slightly. Luffy's expression darkened at the name, but he nodded. "Even Blackbeard. If the government wants to kill everyone I care about, then they're my enemy. And if Teach is my enemy's enemy," he paused, working through logic that would have made Robin proud, Then for now, he's useful. But Luffy, Chopper said nervously, can we really trust them? I mean, Blackbeard killed Ace and I haven't forgotten. Luffy's voice carried a weight that made everyone fall silent. I'll never forget, but Ace wouldn't want me to let you all die just because I couldn't work with someone I hate. Not if I could prevent it. Zoro nodded approvingly. Smart thinking, Captain. Sometimes you've got to work with bastards to kill bigger bastards. Besides, Luffy added, his trademark grin returning, if any of them try to betray us, I'll just kick their asses afterward. On a distant island that officially didn't exist on any marine charts, Marshal D. Teach was having a very different reaction to Shanks' message. Zehahaha, this is rich. Blackbeard slammed a meaty fist on the table, causing several bottles of rum to topple over. The government thinks they can just wipe us out. All of us at once? His crew looked less amused. Van Augur adjusted his rifle scope absently. If Red Hair is right about this weapon, Captain, it could be a genuine threat. Of course it's a threat, Teach's laughter died abruptly. That's what makes it exciting. Do you know what kind of power source an ancient weapon needs? The kind of power I could steal for myself. Jesus, Burgess flexed unconsciously. So we're really gonna work with Straw Hat. After everything, Blackbeard's eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. Oh, we're gonna work with him all right up until the moment I don't need him anymore. Then, he made a throat-cutting gesture. And if he tries the same thing, Doc Q asked weakly from his horse. Then may the best devil fruit user win. Teach stood, his massive frame casting shadows across the room. But first, we've got Marines to kill. Set course for those coordinates. It's time for a family reunion. Meanwhile, in the floating paradise of Karaibari Island, Buggy the Clown was having what could generously be called a complete nervous breakdown. What do you mean they want to kill me? His body split apart in panic, his head floating near the ceiling while his torso gestured wildly below. I didn't even want to be a Yonko. This is all a big misunderstanding. Alvida sighed and caught Buggy's floating head before it could crash into anything valuable. Calm down, you idiot, panicking won't help. Easy for you to say. You're not the one with a target on your back. But even as he protested, Buggy's cunning mind was working. He'd survived Roger's crew, Impel Down, and Marineford through a combination of luck and knowing when to cut his losses. This situation called for both. Captain, Moji said hesitantly, what are we gonna do? Buggy's head reattached to his body with a soft pop. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its hysterical edge. We're gonna do what we've always done. We're gonna survive. And if that means working with those three monsters, then that's what we'll do. He looked around at his crew, misfits and failures, most of them, but they'd followed him this far. Besides, he added with a grin that was only slightly forced, do you know how much treasure Marine headquarters must have? This could be the score of a lifetime. The meeting point Shanks had chosen was Neutral Waters, a small uninhabited island with a natural harbor. The Red Force arrived first, Shanks standing at the bow with his usual relaxed posture that somehow conveyed readiness for violence. The Thousand Sunny appeared next, its lion figurehead seeming to roar a challenge at the morning sun. Luffy could be seen bouncing excitedly on deck, though his crew looked more tense. Blackbeard's ship, the Saber of Xebec, cut through the water like a predator, its dark sails billowing ominously. Even from a distance, Teach's laughter could be heard across the waves. Last came Buggy's ship, painted in garish colors that somehow managed to look both ridiculous and intimidating. Buggy himself stood at the helm, his red nose catching the sunlight. 4 ships, 4 crews, 4 of the most dangerous pirates in the world, all gathering in one place. As they anchored and prepared to go ashore, each crew member felt the weight of history. This wasn't just a meeting, this was the moment that would decide the fate of the pirate age itself. Luffy stretched his arms and grinned. This is gonna be interesting. On the Red Force, Shanks touched the hilt of his sword and smiled grimly. That it is, Luffy, that it is. Blackbeard's eyes gleamed with anticipation and malice in equal measure. Let the games begin. And Buggy. Buggy was just trying not to throw up. The 4 Yonko were about to meet face to face, and the world would never be the same. The beach of the nameless island had never seen anything like this. 4 crews that had shaped the new world's balance of power now stood in an awkward semicircle, weapons half-drawn and tension thick enough to cut with a sword. Luffy hopped off his small boat first, completely ignoring the hostile atmosphere. Shanks, it's been forever. He started running toward his former mentor, arms stretched wide for what was clearly going to be an enthusiastic hug. Straw Hat. Blackbeard's voice stopped Luffy mid-stride. Been a while. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Luffy's expression shifted from joy to something cold and dangerous as he turned to face the man who'd captured Ace. Teach. Zehahaha, still holding grudges. That's not very pirate-like of you. Zoro's hand moved to his sword hilts. Say the word, Captain. Easy there, Roro-Noa. Shanks stepped between them, his presence immediately commanding attention. We're all here for the same reason. Let's not forget that. Buggy chose that moment to make his entrance, floating down from his ship with his arms crossed. Well, this is cozy. Nothing says successful alliance like death glares and barely restrained violence. Shut up, Buggy, Shanks said, but there was fondness in his voice. Don't tell me to shut up, I'm a Yonko too, damn it. Buggy's head detached and floated closer to Shanks. And whose bright idea was it to drag me into this mess anyway? Yours, technically, Shanks replied. You could have ignored the message. And let the Marines blow me up, I'm crazy, not stupid. Luffy watched this exchange with growing confusion. Wait, you two know each other. Old crewmates, Shanks explained. We served on the Oro Jackson together back in Roger's day. Blackbeard's eyebrows raised. Now that's interesting. The great red-haired Shanks and Buggy the Clown, former apprentices on the Pirate King's ship. Small world, not that small, Buggy muttered, his head reattaching with an audible pop. Enough. Shanks' voice carried the weight of command that had made him a Yonko. We need to talk strategy, and we need to do it fast. The Marines aren't going to wait for us to work out our differences. He gestured toward a cluster of rocks that formed a natural amphitheater. Everyone sit, and I mean everyone, crews included. What I'm about to share affects all of us. The next few minutes were an exercise in controlled chaos as nearly 200 pirates arranged themselves on the beach. Luffy's crew clustered protectively around their captain. Blackbeard's crew spread out, hands never far from weapons. Buggy's followers looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and the red hair pirates maintained their usual relaxed alertness. Right, Shanks began once everyone had settled. Here's what I know about Operation Crimson Dawn. He pulled out a weathered scroll case and spread several documents on a flat rock. 3 weeks ago, one of my information brokers infiltrated a world government facility. What she found, he shook his head grimly. They've been working on this for 20 years. What kind of ancient weapon are we talking about? Robin asked, her archaeological instincts overriding her caution. Something called Uranus, Shanks replied. Not much detail in the files, but from what I can piece together, it's satellite-based, orbital bombardment system that can target specific individuals anywhere on the planet. How? Nami's navigator instincts were equally engaged. I mean, how do they track people from space? Blackbeard laughed harshly. Life cards, probably, piece of everyone's vibrancy stored in their system. Can't run from your own soul. Chopper looked horrified. That's impossible to escape from. Exactly, Shanks confirmed. Which is why running isn't an option. Our only choice is to destroy the control system before they can fire. And where exactly is this control system? Zoro asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. New Marineford, deep underground, protected by the strongest fortifications the world government has ever built. Silence fell over the gathering. Even Blackbeard's usual laughter was absent. Finally, Luffy spoke up. So we break in and smash it. What's the problem? The problem, Teach said slowly, is that New Marineford isn't the old Marineford. It's a fortress designed specifically to prevent another incident like your war. 3 admirals, the fleet admiral, elite vice admirals, and probably some surprises we don't know about. Plus, Shanks added, the weapon itself might have other defenses. Ancient weapons usually do. Buggy raised his hand like a student in class. Stupid question, but why don't we just not be together when they fire? I mean, if they're targeting all 4 of us at once, couldn't we just spread out? Because, Van Augur said from his perch on a rock, that assumes they only get 1 shot. A weapon like that, they'll fire as many times as it takes. And individually, Shanks continued, none of us has the strength to break their defenses. Together, we might. Luffy stood up abruptly. Okay, I'm in. When do we attack? Hold on there, Straw Hat, Blackbeard interjected. Nobody said anything about attacking. Maybe there's another way. Like what? Negotiation, deal-making. I've got something the world government wants, they've got something I want. Maybe we can work something out. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Buggy looked shocked. You want to make a deal with the people trying to kill us? Luffy's voice was dangerously quiet. I want to survive, which is more than I can say for your suicide mission. Luffy took a step toward Blackbeard, hockey beginning to radiate from him in waves. You really think they'll honor any deal with you? After everything you've done, I think they're practical people who understand the value of useful allies. The way you were a useful ally to Whitebeard, that did it. Blackbeard's own hockey flared, dark and oppressive. The two forces clashed in the air between them, causing weaker pirates from both crews to stumble. Enough! Shanks stepped between them again, his own conqueror's haki washing over the beach like a tide. This is exactly what the world government is counting on. They know we can't work together, so they're betting we'll tear each other apart before we can threaten them. Both Luffy and Blackbeard stepped back, but neither looked away from the other. Look, Shanks continued, I don't like this any more than the rest of you, but we've got less than 40 hours before they fire that weapon. We can spend that time fighting each other, or we can spend it fighting them. What exactly are you proposing? Buggy asked nervously. Shanks spread out what looked like building schematics. A coordinated assault on New Marineford, four-pronged attack hitting them from every direction at once, forced them to divide their attention. And after we destroy the weapon, Robin asked quietly. After that, we go our separate ways. No obligations, no debts, no alliances. And no betrayals, Luffy added, staring directly at Blackbeard. Zehahaha, of course not. What kind of pirate do you think I am? The kind that murdered his own crewmate, Zoro said flatly. Blackbeard's expression darkened. Thatch knew the risks when he found that devil fruit. Just like all of you know the risks right now. Enough, Shanks' voice cracked like a whip. We're not here to relitigate the past, we're here to survive the next 2 days. He pointed to the schematics. New Marineford has 4 main approach routes. North, south, east, and west. Each team takes one route, fights through to the center, and converges on the weapon's location. What about coordination? Nami asked. How do we make sure we're not working at cross purposes? Ben Beckman stepped forward, speaking for the first time. Transponder snails on the same frequency, real-time communication between all 4 teams. And if one team gets in trouble, Usopp's question was practical if nervous. The others adapt, Shanks said simply. This isn't a plan where everything has to go perfectly. It's a plan where we improvise and overcome. Luffy grinned for the first time since the meeting started. I like it. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning, Shanks replied. That gives us time to prepare and rest. Once we start this, there's no turning back. What about our crews? Jesus Burgess asked. Some of them aren't exactly frontline fighters. Everyone fights, Luffy said firmly. This isn't about who's strong enough. It's about who's willing to fight for their freedom. Easy words from someone whose entire crew could probably take on a marine base single-handed, Buggy muttered. Your crew held their own at Marineford, Shanks reminded him. Don't sell them short. That was different. That was chaos. This is, Buggy gestured helplessly. This is walking into the lion's den and asking for seconds. It's what pirates do, Luffy said simply. We don't run from fights, we run toward them. Blackbeard laughed, but there was approval in it. Now that's something I can respect. Fine, Straw Hat, you've got your alliance. He stood and extended a massive hand. But after this is over, all bets are off. Luffy stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Everyone held their breath. Finally, he reached out and shook it, his grip firm and steady. After this is over, he agreed. But until then, you're my ally, and I protect my allies. Even me, Buggy asked sarcastically. Even you, Big Nose. It's not that big, despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the barely controlled hostility. Several people actually laughed at that. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Shanks rolled up the schematics. We'll spend the rest of today planning specifics. Tomorrow at dawn, we sail for New Marineford. As the meeting broke up into smaller planning groups, Luffy found himself standing alone at the water's edge, staring out at the horizon. Having second thoughts, Shanks approached quietly. No, Luffy replied, just thinking about Ace. He'd probably love this, all 4 Yonko working together to stick it to the Marines. He'd also probably warn you not to trust Blackbeard. I don't trust him, Luffy's voice was matter of fact. But I need him, at least for now, Shanks nodded approvingly. You've grown up, Luffy. The kid I knew would have punched first and planned later. I still might punch him later. Save it for after we win. As the sun began to set over their temporary camp, 4 crews that had never worked together before started the delicate process of becoming an army. It wouldn't be easy, and it probably wouldn't last. But for the next 36 hours, they would be the most dangerous force the world had ever seen. Dawn brought an unusual sight to the nameless island, 4 of the world's most notorious pirate crews working together like a well-oiled machine. Almost, I'm telling you, the North approach is suicide. Buggy's voice carried across the beach, where the 4 captains huddled around a detailed map of New Marineford. That's where they'll have the heaviest defenses, which is exactly why we're taking it, Blackbeard countered, stabbing a thick finger at the fortress's northern wall. They'll never expect a direct assault on their strongest point. They'll never expect it because it's stupid. Luffy, who had been quietly studying the map while munching on a piece of meat, finally spoke up. Buggy's got a point, but so does Teach. He traced a route with his finger. What if the North team goes in loud and obvious, draws their attention, while the other three teams sneak in? Shanks nodded approvingly. A feint, I like it. But who takes the suicide mission? I will, Luffy said without hesitation. Like hell you will, Zoro interjected from behind him. If anyone's taking the dangerous route, it should be me, Blackbeard interrupted. My crew's got the firepower for a frontal assault, and, he grinned nastily, I've been wanting to test my abilities against Admiral-level opponents for a while now. The other three captains stared at him in surprise. What? Teach's grin widened. You think I got to be a Yonko by playing it safe? Besides, someone's got to keep the Marines busy while you three do the sneaky stuff. That's actually... Shanks paused, looking troubled by the fact that he was agreeing with Blackbeard. That's actually tactically sound. Don't sound so surprised, Red Hair. I didn't get this far by being stupid. Across the beach, the crews were having their own planning sessions. The Straw Hats had spread out their own map, with Nami calculating approach vectors while Robin studied architectural details. The underground facility extends at least 3 levels down, Robin explained, pointing to cross-section drawings. Classical world government construction, multiple redundancies, blast doors every 50 meters. Any idea what we'll find when we get there? Frankie asked, adjusting his sunglasses. Ancient weapons tend to be. Temperamental, Robin replied carefully. Pluton required specific knowledge to operate safely. Uranus might have similar safeguards. Or it might just blow up if we look at it wrong, Usopp added helpfully. That's the spirit, Longnose, Sanji said dryly. Really boosting morale there. Meanwhile, the red hair pirates were having a much different conversation. Boss, Lucky Roo said around a mouthful of meat, you sure about this alliance? Blackbeard's planning something, we all know it. Of course he is, Shanks replied. Question is whether he'll make his move before or after we deal with the weapon. My money's on after, Ben Beckman said, cleaning his rifle. He needs us alive until the job's done. And then, Shanks touched the hilt of his sword, then we'll be ready for him. The buggy pirates, for their part, were having what could charitably be called a crisis of faith. Captain, Alvida said quietly, half the crew's ready to desert, they're terrified. And the other half, terrified but too loyal to run. Buggy sighed, his head detaching to float at eye level with his first mate. Can't say I blame either group, this is way above our usual pay grade. So why are we doing it? Because, Buggy's voice grew uncharacteristically serious, sometimes you don't get a choice. The world government decided we all needed to die, that's not negotiable. He looked around at his crew, misfits and failures, most of them, but they'd followed him through hell and back. We might not be the strongest, but we're survivors. And sometimes that's enough. The afternoon was spent in intense preparation. Weapons were sharpened, plans refined, and last-minute intelligence gathered from every available source. It was during this time that an unexpected complication arose. Captain, Chopper came running toward the planning area, his small hooves kicking up sand. We've got a problem. Luffy looked up from where he'd been arm wrestling with Jesus Burgess. What kind of problem? Medical kind. 3 of Buggy's crew are showing signs of scurvy, 2 of Blackbeard's people have infections that could turn serious and, Chopper looked embarrassed. 1 of Shank's crew has what looks like food poisoning. So, Luffy asked, confused, so we can't take sick people into a major battle, there'll be liabilities. Before anyone could respond, Doc Q spoke up from where he sat slumped over his horse. I could treat them if you trust me. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Doc Q was Blackbeard's crew doctor, but he was also known for his unconventional methods. Your treatments tend to be as dangerous as the diseases, Ben Beckman observed. Usually yes, but I do know how to actually heal people when I want to. Chopper looked torn between professional curiosity and healthy suspicion. What do you have in mind? Standard treatments. Vitamin C for the scurvy, antibiotics for the infections, something for the stomach bug, nothing fancy, nothing experimental. And we're supposed to trust you because, Zoro's hand rested on his sword hilt. Because, Doc Q coughed weakly, if those people die tomorrow, it hurts our chances of survival. I'm many things, but I'm not suicidal. After a moment's hesitation, Chopper nodded. I'll supervise. And if you try anything suspicious, you'll turn into a monster and tear me apart. Yes, I've heard the stories. As the 2 doctors worked together, Chopper providing supplies, Doc Q providing expertise, an interesting dynamic emerged. Despite their very different approaches to medicine, they had a surprising amount in common. Interesting technique, Chopper observed as Doc Q mixed a particularly effective remedy for seasickness. Where did you learn that? Books mostly. You'd be surprised how many medical texts you can find in abandoned marine bases. You read medical textbooks for fun. I read everything for fun. Knowledge is the only wealth that can't be stolen. By evening, all the patients were showing improvement, and the two crews involved were looking at each other with slightly less suspicion. Maybe they're not all monsters, Kabaji whispered to Moji. Or maybe they're just good at pretending, Moji replied, but there was less conviction in his voice. As night fell, the four captains gathered one last time to finalize their plans. Routes are set, Shanks confirmed. Blackbeard takes the north wall, loud and obvious. Buggy takes the east stealth approach through the harbor district. I'll take the west through the residential areas. And Luffy gets the south wall. Why the south for me? Luffy asked. Because that's where the main gates are. If anyone's going to punch their way through the front door, it should be you, Luffy grinned. I can do that. Timing is crucial, Shanks continued. We need to hit all four sides simultaneously. If one team goes in too early or too late, the whole plan falls apart. What's our signal? Buggy asked. The explosion, Blackbeard said with obvious relish. What explosion? The one I'm going to make when I hit the north wall. Trust me, you'll know it when you see it. That's actually not a terrible plan, Nami admitted grudgingly. Communications stay open at all times, Ben Beckman added. If someone gets in trouble, the others need to know immediately. And if someone betrays the alliance? Zoro asked, looking directly at Blackbeard's crew. Then they deal with 3 very angry Yonko crews, Shanks replied smoothly. As the meeting broke up, Luffy found himself walking along the beach, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The world government's weapon, the unlikely alliance, the battle that was coming. Heavy thoughts, Robin joined him at the water's edge. Just thinking about tomorrow. We're really going to attack Marine headquarters. Having doubts? No, Luffy's voice was firm. They want to hurt my friends. I won't let that happen. Even if it means working with Blackbeard. Luffy was quiet for a long moment. Ace wouldn't want me to get everyone killed just because I hate the guy who killed him. He'd want me to be smart about it. And after the battle, when Blackbeard inevitably tries to eliminate potential rivals, then I'll deal with him, but not before. As they headed back to camp, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows, Van Augur, Blackbeard's sniper, lowering his rifle's scope. Interesting, he murmured to himself. Very interesting indeed. The night passed quickly, filled with final preparations and restless sleep. Some crew members sharpened weapons, others wrote letters they might never send. A few, like Luffy, simply slept like babies, completely unconcerned by the monumental battle awaiting them. As dawn approached, 4 ships prepared to set sail for what would either be the greatest victory in pirate history or the most spectacular defeat. Standing at the bow of the Thousand Sunny, Luffy watched the sun rise over the horizon and grinned. All right, world government, he said to himself. You want a war, you've got one. Behind him, his crew made final preparations, each lost in their own thoughts but united in their determination to follow their captain anywhere, even into the jaws of death itself. On the other ships, similar scenes played out. Warriors preparing for battle, friends saying goodbye, and leaders trying to hold together an alliance that shouldn't exist but somehow did. In a few hours, they would reach New Marineford. And then the real test would begin. New Marineford rose from the ocean like a monument to absolute power. Massive walls of seastone-reinforced concrete gleamed white in the morning sun, while countless cannons tracked the approaching ships with mechanical precision. The rebuilt fortress was 3 times larger than its predecessor, designed by the world government's finest architects to be absolutely impregnable. They were about to find out just how impregnable it really was. Target acquired, Van Augur reported through the transponder snail network, his voice crackling with static across all 4 ships. Marine spotters have definitely seen us. They're mobilizing. From the Thousand Sunny's crow's nest, Usopp confirmed the sighting. I count a lot of Marines, like a really concerning number of Marines. How many is a really concerning number? Nami asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. All of them, I think. The 4 ships had approached from different directions, timing their arrival to converge simultaneously on New Marineford's perimeter. Blackbeard's dark vessel cut through the northern waters like a predator, while Shanks approached from the west with his usual casual confidence. Buggy's garishly painted ship bobbed nervously in the eastern approach, and the Thousand Sunny sailed boldly toward the main southern gates. This is it, Shanks' voice came through the snails. Everyone remembers the plan. Hit hard, hit fast, find the weapon, Luffy replied, bouncing excitedly on the Sunny's figurehead. Don't die, Buggy added helpfully. Zehahaha. Where's the fun in that? Blackbeard's laughter boomed across the airwaves. Alarms began blaring across New Marineford as the Marine sentries finally grasped what they were seeing. 4 Yonko, approaching simultaneously with clear hostile intent. All units to battle stations, Admiral Akainu's voice echoed from loudspeakers throughout the fortress. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Showtime, Frankie muttered, powering up the Sunny's weapon systems. The first warning shots came from the fortress's outer perimeter guns, massive cannons that could sink a Marine battleship with a single hit. Plumes of water erupted around each ship as the gunners found their range. Evasive maneuvers, Nami shouted, spinning the Sunny's wheel hard to port. On the other ships, similar scenes played out. Shank's crew moved with practiced efficiency, their smaller ship darting between cannon blasts like a dancer avoiding raindrops. Buggy's crew screamed and panicked, but somehow managed to avoid being hit through a combination of terror-fueled speed and dumb luck. Blackbeard, predictably, took a different approach. "Hold course," he bellowed to his helmsman. "Let them shoot, Captain, are you insane?" Jesus Burgess yelled back. "Probably, but I've got a point to make." A massive cannonball slammed into the saber of Zebek's reinforced hull. The ship shuddered but held together, its dark steel plating absorbing the impact with barely a dent. "Now that's what I call a ship," Teach laughed maniacally. "Gum Gum Fruit Boy, you seeing this?" "Yeah," Luffy replied through the snail, "but watch this." "Gum Gum, balloon." The Straw Hat Captain inflated himself to enormous proportions just as a cannonball struck the Sunny's stern. Instead of penetrating the ship, the projectile bounced off Luffy's rubber body and ricocheted back toward the fortress. "Did he just?" someone from Blackbeard's crew started to ask. "Yep," Zoro confirmed. "He just returned fire using his body as a trampoline." The returned cannonball struck one of Marineford's gun emplacements with a satisfying explosion. "Not bad, Straw Hat." Blackbeard's approval was genuine. "Now watch a professional work." The northern approach brought Blackbeard's ship within range of the fortress's heaviest defenses. Automated weapons systems locked onto the saber of Zebek, and for a moment the air filled with so much metal that it looked like a deadly hailstorm. Then Blackbeard raised his hand and everything changed. Dark fruit. Black hole, a sphere of absolute darkness, materialized above his ship, pulling in every projectile within a 100-meter radius. Cannonballs, bullets, even pieces of debris from previous impacts, everything vanished into the swirling void. Liberation, the absorbed ammunition erupted outward with twice its original force, turning Blackbeard into a one-man artillery battery. The northern wall of New Marineford disappeared in a chain of explosions that could be felt 50 miles away. "That's our signal," Shanks called out. "All teams go." The southern gates of New Marineford were impressive, 30 feet of reinforced steel designed to stop anything short of an ancient weapon. They were also, as Luffy pointed out in his way. "Gear forth, Boundman." Steam erupted from Luffy's body as he transformed, his skin taking on a metallic sheen while Haki flowed around him like black lightning. He launched himself from the Sunny's bow with enough force to crack the deck. Gum Gum King Kong Gun. His fist, enlarged to the size of a building and coated in armament Haki, met the gates with a sound like the world breaking. The ancient steel held for exactly 1 second before exploding inward in a shower of twisted metal. "And that's how you knock," Zoro observed approvingly. The Straw Hats poured through the breach like a tidal wave of controlled chaos. Luffy landed in the fortress's main courtyard and immediately found himself facing a battalion of Marine soldiers, all of them armed and looking extremely unhappy to see him. Rubber Gatling. His fists became a blur as he launched dozens of punches simultaneously, each one precisely aimed to incapacitate rather than kill. Marines flew in all directions, their weapons clattering uselessly across the stone courtyard. Behind him, his crew followed up with their own specialized attacks. Zoro's swords flashed as he cut through enemy weapons without touching their wielders. Sanji danced between opponents, his kicks disabling without doing permanent damage. Even Usopp's slingshot projectiles were carefully aimed to knock out rather than kill. "Since when do we hold back?" Frankie asked, smashing through a defensive line with his robotic strength. "Since we're the good guys in this fight," Luffy replied, deflecting a sword thrust and countering with a gentle but decisive punch. "These guys are just doing their jobs. The real enemy is upstairs." Meanwhile, on the eastern approach, Buggy's stealth mission was going about as well as could be expected. "This is stealth," Alvida hissed as they crept through New Marineford's harbor district. "Half your crew is clomping around like they're wearing wooden shoes." "It's not my fault they're not naturally sneaky," Buggy whispered back, his head floating independently while his body tried to remain hidden behind a pile of cargo crates. They'd managed to slip past the outer perimeter while the Marines were distracted by the other 3 attacks. But now they were deep in enemy territory, with alarms blaring all around them. "Captain," Moji whispered, "I think we're lost." "We're not lost, we're taking the scenic route." "The scenic route through a marine fortress. Would you prefer the direct route?" "Because that involves fighting our way through 3,000 Marines." As if summoned by his words, a patrol of 20 Marines rounded the corner ahead of them. For a moment, both sides stared at each other in surprise. "Aren't you Buggy the Clown?" one of the Marines asked. "No," Buggy replied automatically. "I'm, Muggy the Mime." The Marines looked at his distinctive red nose, then at his equally distinctive crew, then back at his nose. "Yeah, that's definitely Buggy the Clown." "Run," Buggy shouted, his carefully planned stealth mission dissolving into chaos. On the western approach, Shanks was having considerably better luck. The Red Hair Pirates moved through New Marineford's residential quarter like ghosts, their years of experience showing in every step. They encountered several Marine patrols, but dealt with them so quickly and quietly that the bodies were hidden before anyone noticed they were missing. "Residential areas clear," Ben Beckman reported through his transponder snail, moving toward the central complex now. "Any sign of Admiral-level opposition?" Shanks asked. "Not yet, but they know we're here. They're planning something." As if to prove his point, the temperature in their immediate area suddenly spiked by 20 degrees. "Akai knew," Shanks muttered, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. "Red-haired Shanks!" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the buildings around them. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Admiral Akainu stepped out of what had appeared to be an empty alley, magma dripping from his fists and leaving smoking holes in the pavement. Behind him came a full squadron of vice admirals, each one a powerhouse in their own right. "Sakazuki," Shanks replied calmly, "you're looking well, a little hot under the collar perhaps." "Spare me your jokes." "You've made a grave mistake coming here." "Have I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the ones who made the mistake." Shanks drew his sword, the blade gleaming with haki, threatening the lives of every pirate in the world. "That was bound to unite us eventually." "Unite you?" Akainu laughed, a sound like volcanic glass scraping against stone. "You think this pathetic alliance will last 5 minutes once the shooting starts? Pirates don't work together, they're too selfish, too treacherous." "Maybe most pirates," Shanks agreed, "but these aren't most pirates, these are Yonko." The two forces faced each other across the empty street, the air itself seeming to thicken with anticipation. This was the kind of confrontation that could level city blocks and leave scars on the landscape for generations. Then Akainu smiled, and Shanks felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What makes you think," the Admiral said slowly, "that we didn't want you to come here?" Back at the northern wall, Blackbeard was having the time of his life. He'd punched through the fortress's outer defenses like they were made of paper, leaving a trail of destruction that stretched from the coastline to the main complex. Marines threw everything they had at him, cannons, rifles, even a few devil fruit users, but nothing seemed to slow him down. "Zehahaha, is this really the best the world government can do?" he roared, catching a cannonball in his bare hand and crushing it to powder. "I'm almost disappointed." "Don't get cocky, Captain," Van Augur warned from his sniper's perch. "They're hurting us." "What do you mean?" "Look around, they're not trying to stop us. They're guiding us toward the central courtyard." Blackbeard paused in his rampage and took a more careful look at the Marine positions. His sniper was right. The defenders were putting up just enough resistance to slow them down while leaving clear paths toward the fortress's center. "A trap," he mused. "How exciting. Should we change course?" "Hell no, I want to see what they're planning." As his crew advanced through the increasingly obvious funnel of Marine positions, Blackbeard's grin only grew wider. Whatever the world government had prepared, he was confident in his ability to handle it. That confidence lasted right up until he reached the central courtyard and saw what was waiting for him. "Well," he said, his laughter finally fading. "That's new." In the center of the courtyard stood a figure that shouldn't exist, tall, imposing, and crackling with the kind of power that made even Yonko take notice. The man wore a Marine admiral's coat, but his face was hidden behind a mask that seemed to absorb light. "Marshal D. Teach," the figure said, his voice carrying clearly across the battlefield. "You've caused us quite a bit of trouble over the years." "Do I know you?" Blackbeard asked, though his casual tone didn't fool anyone. "Not yet, but you will." The masked figure raised one hand, and the air around him began to shimmer with heat that made Akainu's magma look like a cool breeze. "I am Admiral Ryo Kugiyu, and I've been looking forward to this meeting." All across New Marineford, the four Yonko crews suddenly realized that their carefully planned assault had walked straight into a trap that had been years in the making. The real battle was about to begin. Admiral Ryokugiyu raised his hand and the world caught fire. Not the red-orange flames of normal combustion, but something far more dangerous, white-hot plasma that turned the air itself into a weapon. The temperature in the courtyard spiked so high that stone began to crack and metal started to glow. Blackbeard's grin never wavered. "Zehahaha, now we're talking." He spread his arms wide, darkness flowing from his body like liquid night. Dark fruit, infinite gravity. The two forces met in the center of the courtyard with a sound like reality tearing. Plasma and darkness swirled together in a miniature hurricane of destruction, each admiral-level power trying to overwhelm the other. "Impressive," Ryokugiyu admitted, his voice somehow carrying clearly through the chaos. "But you're facing more than just heat," Marshal D. Teach. The masked admiral's other hand rose, and suddenly the ground beneath Blackbeard's feet erupted. Not with magma like Akainu's power, but with something that looked like liquid starlight, energy so concentrated it had weight, gravity, physical presence. "What the hell?" Blackbeard started to say, then had to dive sideways as a spear of solidified energy passed through the space where his head had been. Plasma fruit," Ryokugiyu explained conversationally, as if he wasn't currently trying to kill one of the world's most dangerous pirates. "The fourth state of matter, solid liquid gas. And this?" Van Augur's rifle cracked from somewhere in the distance, but the bullet simply vaporized as it approached the Admiral's plasma field. "Boss," Jesus Burgess called out, "this guy's trouble." "All the best ones are," Blackbeard laughed, but sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. Fighting an admiral was never easy, even for a Yonko. Meanwhile, across the fortress, Shanks was having his own problems. Akainu's magma fist missed his head by inches, leaving a trail of superheated air that would have killed a normal person. Shanks twisted aside and brought his sword up in a perfect counterattack, hockey-infused steel meeting molten rock with a sound like thunder. "You've gotten slow, Sakazuki," Shanks observed, though he was breathing hard. "And you've gotten old, Red Hair." Around them, the Red Hair pirates battled the assembled vice admirals with practiced efficiency. Ben Beckman's rifle spoke repeatedly, each shot precisely placed to disable rather than kill. Lucky Roo moved with surprising grace for such a large man, his bullets finding gaps in enemy armor with uncanny accuracy. But they were outnumbered, and everyone knew it. "This is taking too long," Beckman muttered, reloading his rifle while keeping one eye on the vice admiral he'd been dueling. "We need to reach that weapon." "I know," Shanks replied, deflecting another magma punch. "But first we need to." He was interrupted by an explosion from the eastern section of the fortress that rattled windows 3 districts away. "What the hell was that?" Akainu demanded, momentarily distracted. Shanks grinned. "That would be Buggy." 10 minutes earlier, Buggy's carefully planned stealth mission had officially become a complete disaster. "This way," he shouted, his detached hand pointing down a corridor while his body ran in the opposite direction. "No, wait, that way. Actually, I have no idea which way." Behind them, the Marine Patrol had grown from 20 soldiers to what felt like the entire fortress garrison. Alarms blared from every direction, boots thundered on stone floors, and Buggy was pretty sure he could hear Admiral-level opponents closing in. "Captain," Alvida called out, smashing through a group of Marines with her iron club. "We need to find cover, in a Marine fortress. What do you think this is, a friendly neighborhood?" "The armory," Kabaji pointed to a heavy door marked with warning symbols. "If we can reach the armory, we can blow it up," Buggy finished, his eyes lighting up. "Kabaji, you're a genius." "I was going to say resupply, but okay." They fought their way through the corridor, Buggy's devil fruit power proving surprisingly effective in the confined space. Marines couldn't land a solid hit on an opponent whose body parts could separate at will, and his crew took advantage of the confusion to push forward. The armory door was locked, naturally, but Alvida's club made short work of the steel hinges. "Jackpot," Moji whispered as they stepped inside. The room was filled with enough explosives to level a small island. Cannonballs, gunpowder, experimental weapons that probably violated several international treaties. It was a demolitions expert's dream. "Okay," Buggy said, his mind working faster than it had in years. "New plan, we don't sneak to the weapon. We blow up half the fortress and walk there through the rubble." "That's insane," one of his crew members protested. "That's piracy," Buggy corrected. "Now start setting charges. We've got about 2 minutes before." The armory door exploded inward, and through the smoke stepped a figure that made everyone's blood freeze. Admiral Kizaru moved with his characteristic casual speed, light bending around him as he surveyed the scene. "Oh my," he said in his slow, drawling voice. "This is quite the predicament. Buggy the Clown in an armory full of explosives. How illuminating." "Run," Buggy whispered. "What?" Alvida asked. "Run." The Buggy pirates scattered in all directions as Kizaru raised one finger, light beginning to concentrate at its tip. But before he could fire, Buggy did something completely unexpected. He triggered every explosive in the room at once. The resulting explosion could be heard in the next county. It blew out every window in a 6-block radius, cracked the foundation of the fortress, and sent a mushroom cloud of smoke and debris high into the sky. When the dust settled, Kizaru was still standing exactly where he'd been, his light-based powers having protected him from the worst of the blast. But the Buggy pirates were gone, having used the explosion as cover to escape into the fortress's lower levels. "Interesting strategy," Kizaru mused to himself. "Destroy everything and hope you survive." Very. Pirate-like, in the southern courtyard, Luffy was having considerably more fun. Gum Gum Red Hawk. His fire-enhanced fist smashed through a line of marine defenses, clearing a path for his crew to advance deeper into the fortress. They'd fought their way through 3 defensive lines already, and Luffy was starting to suspect that the Marines were deliberately funneling them towards something. But he didn't care. Whatever trap they'd prepared, he'd punch his way through it. "Luffy," Nami called out, "there's something wrong with these defenses." "What do you mean?" "They're too easy. The Marines are barely putting up a fight." She was right. The defenders were putting on a good show, but their heart wasn't really in it. They were going through the motions of defending their fortress without actually trying to win. "It's a trap," Robin confirmed, her archaeological instincts picking up on details the others missed. "They want us to reach the center of the fortress." "So?" Luffy asked, deflecting a cannonball with his bare hand. "We want to reach the center too. Everybody wins." "That's not how traps work, Captain," Sanji pointed out, kicking an entire squad of Marines into unconsciousness. "Sure it is. We walk into their trap, they spring it, we punch our way out. Simple." Zoro laughed despite himself. "You know what? He's got a point. If we know it's a trap, it's not really a trap anymore." "That logic is so stupid it might actually work," Frankie admitted. They pressed forward through increasingly token resistance, the Marines falling back in what was clearly a planned retreat. Within minutes, they'd reached the entrance to the fortress's central complex, a massive door marked with the world government seal. "This is it," Robin said, studying the architecture. "The weapon should be directly below us." Luffy cracked his knuckles. "Then let's go say hello." He was about to punch through the door when it opened on its own, revealing a figure that made everyone stop cold. Fleet Admiral Akainu stepped through the doorway, but something was wrong with him. His usual molten aura was subdued, almost contained, and his eyes held an expression that might have been fear. "Straw Hat Luffy," he said formally. "You and your crew will come with me immediately." Usopp said eloquently. "What? There's been a development. The weapon. It's not what we thought it was." "What's that supposed to mean?" Zoro demanded, his hand moving to his sword hilt. Akainu's jaw worked for a moment, as if the words were difficult to say. "It's alive, and it's awake, and it—" He paused, looking genuinely shaken. "It wants to meet you." Deep beneath New Marineford, in a chamber that predated the fortress by centuries, something ancient stirred. The world government had spent 20 years preparing Operation Crimson Dawn, believing they understood the weapon they'd uncovered. They'd built containment systems, control interfaces, targeting computers, everything needed to turn an archaeological find into an instrument of global dominance. They'd been wrong about almost everything. The entity that had once been called Uranus was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was something far older and far more dangerous, a consciousness that had slumbered beneath the ocean for 800 years, waiting for the right moment to wake. That moment had arrived when 4 Yonko had come calling. Through sensors the world government didn't know existed, the entity had been watching the battle above. It had observed the alliance between natural enemies, the cooperation between crews that should have been fighting each other, the willingness of pirates to set aside personal grudges for a greater cause. It found this interesting, more than interesting. It found it familiar. 800 years ago, another alliance had formed, another group of individuals who refused to accept the world as it was, who fought against impossible odds for something better. They had been called the D-Clan, and now their descendants had come home. In the depths of the ancient chamber, something that had once been a weapon began to transform into something else entirely. The targeting systems went dark. The orbital components shifted into new configurations. Energy that had been designed for destruction began to flow along different paths toward different purposes. The world government had built a trap, thinking they could use an ancient weapon to eliminate their enemies. Instead, they had given their enemies exactly what they needed to eliminate the world government. The entity that was not Uranus began to laugh, a sound like cosmic wind through stellar debris, ancient beyond comprehension and terrible beyond description. Above, the four Yonko crews felt that laughter in their bones and knew instinctively that everything had changed. The real battle was about to begin. The laughter that emerged from beneath New Marineford wasn't heard so much as felt, a vibration that traveled through stone and steel and bone, settling deep in the chest cavity where it resonated like a struck bell. Across the fortress, every fight paused as combatants on both sides felt something fundamental shift in the world around them. "What the hell was that?" Blackbeard demanded, his darkness wavering for just a moment as the sound washed over him. Admiral Ryokugiyu's plasma field flickered. "That wasn't part of the plan." "Your plan?" Blackbeard's grin returned, sharper than before. "Zehahaha, sounds like your ancient weapon has some opinions of its own." Before Ryokugiyu could respond, every transponder snail in New Marineford, marine and pirate alike, crackled to life simultaneously. The voice that emerged was like nothing anyone had ever heard. Ancient beyond measure, vast as the ocean itself, and tinged with something that might have been amusement. How delightfully unexpected. "The children of the dawn have returned to me." In the southern sector, Luffy tilted his head like a curious animal. "Hey, that voice sounds familiar. Where have I heard it before?" "You haven't," Robin said quietly, but her face had gone pale. "No one alive has heard that voice, but I've read about it. 800 years I have slumbered beneath the waves, dreaming of the day when those who carry the will of D would return to finish what their ancestors began." "The will of D," Fleet Admiral Akainu's voice was strangled. "This wasn't part of Operation Crimson Dawn, this wasn't part of any plan. Monkey D. Luffy, Marshal D. Teach, how fitting that you should arrive together as your forebears once did. Though I sense more companions in this endeavor, red-haired Shanks who carries the weight of promises made to the dead, and, ah yes, Little Buggy who once sailed with the king himself." On every ship, in every corner of the fortress, pirates and marines alike felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "Come to me, children, all of you. It is time you learned what the world government has truly awakened." The voice faded, leaving behind a silence that was somehow more unsettling than the cosmic laughter had been. "This changes everything," Ben Beckman said through the transponder snail network. Around him, the battle between the Red Hair Pirates and the Vice Admirals had ground to a halt, everyone too stunned to continue fighting. "You think," Buggy's voice crackled with static and panic. "Some ancient voice is calling us children of the dawn, and you think this changes things? I never signed up for mystical destiny crap." "None of us signed up for this," Shanks replied grimly, lowering his sword though he kept his eyes on Akainu. "But we're here now." The Fleet Admiral looked genuinely shaken. 20 years of research, 20 years of preparation. Not once did our scientists mention that the weapon might be conscious, maybe because your scientists were idiots, Zoro suggested helpfully. "They were not idiots, three-sword warrior. They were simply looking at me through the wrong lens. When one expects to find a tool, one sees only metal and circuitry. They could not perceive what I truly am." The voice had returned, somehow speaking directly to each individual while remaining audible to all. "I am the last remnant of a civilization that your ancestors helped to destroy, not out of malice, but out of necessity. We had become something the world could not tolerate. So the Dawn Warriors came, led by those who bore the initial D, and they made a choice that echoes through the centuries." "What choice?" Luffy asked, speaking to the air itself. "To bury us beneath the waves rather than eradicate us entirely. To give us the chance to learn, to grow, to become something better than we were. Your ancestor, Joy Boy, believed that someday we might be worthy of redemption." The name hit Luffy like a physical blow. He'd heard it before on Fishman Island in the ancient texts that spoke of promises and failures and hopes deferred. "Joy Boy," he whispered. "Indeed, the first to carry the will of D in your age. The one who tried to unite the world and failed, but whose failure planted the seeds for this moment." Robin's archaeological mind was working furiously. "If you're telling the truth, then the Void Century was when your people realized that some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve and some powers too terrible to wield. So they made a pact with us. We would sleep, and when we woke, we would serve not as weapons of destruction, but as guardians of a better world." "Guardians?" Admiral Kizaru's voice drifted from somewhere in the fortress. "How very inconvenient. Is it, Borsalino? You and your government have spent decades preparing to use me as an instrument of genocide." Instead, you have awakened something that remembers when the celestial dragons were merely ambitious merchants, and the world government was a conspiracy of frightened nobles. The temperature around Akainu spiked as his control slipped. Enough of this mystical nonsense. Ancient weapon or not, you're still a tool. Tools serve their masters. Tools, yes, but which of us is truly the tool, Sakazuki? You who have spent your life enforcing the will of those who see you as disposable, or I who choose my own purpose. The Magma Admiral's response was a pillar of molten rock that erupted from the courtyard and shot toward the sky. It struck nothing, no target, no enemy, just empty air that somehow felt less empty after the attack. Your anger is noted, but violence will not serve you here. I am not within your reach, Fleet Admiral. I exist in the spaces between spaces, in the quantum foam that underlies reality itself. Your government built their systems around my physical components, never realizing that I had transcended the need for a body. Great, Nami muttered. We're fighting a ghost computer. Not fighting, navigator of the Straw Hats, conversing. There is much you need to understand before we proceed. Without warning, the world changed. Not dramatically, there was no flash of light or rumble of thunder. One moment, the four crews were scattered throughout New Marineford, engaged in various battles and confrontations. The next, they were all standing in a vast circular chamber that definitely hadn't existed moments before. The walls were covered in strange script that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. The floor was transparent, revealing an impossible vista of stars and swirling galaxies. At the center of the chamber, a column of soft light pulsed in rhythm with what might have been a heartbeat. Okay, Usopp said faintly, this is new. Marines and pirates alike looked around in confusion, weapons half raised but with no clear target. Even the admirals seemed uncertain, their various powers flickering as they tried to understand what had just happened. Welcome to my true form. Here, in this space that exists between dimensions, we can speak without the interference of those who would use our conversation for their own ends. You brought us all here, Luffy asked, bouncing slightly as he tested the strange surface beneath his feet. All who needed to be here, observe. The chamber's walls became transparent, revealing the outside world. New Marineford continued to exist, with marine personnel going about their duties and ships patrolling the waters. But their movements seemed mechanical, repetitive. Temporal dilation, Robin breathed. You've moved us outside normal time. Partially correct. We exist in the same moment, stretched and expanded to allow for proper discourse. To the outside world, this conversation will take mere seconds. To us, it may last hours. Shanks stepped forward, his hand still resting on his sword hilt. What do you want from us? The same thing I have always wanted, to fulfill the promise made 800 years ago. To help build the world that Joy Boy envisioned but could not create. And what kind of world was that? Blackbeard asked, though for once his usual laughter was absent. The column of light pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber was filled with images, not on screens or projections, but hanging in the air like solid holograms. They showed scenes of a world unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Islands floating in the sky, cities beneath the sea, people of all races working together without fear or hatred. A world without the barriers that divide you, without the artificial scarcities that breed conflict. Without the hereditary rulers who treat entire populations as their personal property. The world government, Admiral Akainu said flatly, among others, the celestial dragons, the systems of slavery and oppression, the careful cultivation of ignorance and fear. The entity's voice carried a weight of ancient sadness. These were not part of the original design for human civilization. You're talking about destroying the current world order. Fleet Admiral Sengoku's voice came from somewhere in the chamber, though his physical form wasn't visible. I am talking about completing it. The current world order is incomplete, a half-finished building that has never been properly constructed. Joy Boy and his companions began the work of tearing down what was broken. It is time to finish building what should replace it. And if we refuse, Kizaru asked lazily, then you return to your battles and I return to my slumber. The cycles of violence continue, the strong prey upon the weak, and eventually this world burns itself to ash while I dream of what might have been. That's it, Buggy looked suspicious. No threats, no ultimatums, no join me or die speeches. Little Buggy, I am not your enemy. I am not anyone's enemy. I am simply offering to help you become what you have the potential to be. The chamber fell silent except for the steady pulse of the central light. Around the edges, Marines and pirates alike struggled to process what they were hearing. It was Luffy who finally spoke, his voice cutting through the cosmic quiet with its usual simplicity. So you want to help us build a better world? And you're asking instead of forcing us. That's actually pretty cool. You approve, inheritor of the will of D. I don't know about all the fancy destiny stuff, Luffy admitted. But I like the idea of a world where my friends don't have to be afraid, where nobody has to be afraid. He looked around the chamber, his gaze taking in pirates and marines alike. The question is, what does everyone else think? For a moment, nobody moved. Then, surprising everyone including himself, Fleet Admiral Akainu stepped forward. I have spent my entire life serving what I believed was justice, he said slowly. If there is a way to build a truly just world, then perhaps it's time to consider new methods. The chamber erupted in shocked voices, Marines horrified by their leader's apparent betrayal, pirates suspicious of some elaborate trap. But beneath the noise, something else was building. Hope. For the first time in 800 years, the descendants of the Dawn Warriors were in the same room as the entity they had once helped to imprison. And instead of ancient grievances or cosmic vengeance, they were discussing the possibility of working together. Then let us begin, the entity said, and its voice carried the weight of centuries finally lifting. Let us finish what Joy Boy started. The silence that followed Akainu's declaration stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Pirates and Marines stared at each other across the impossible chamber, 8 centuries of conditioning warring with the possibility of something genuinely new. It was Blackbeard who broke first. Zehahaha, this is rich, his laughter echoed off the shifting walls. The great fleet admiral, ready to throw away everything he's ever believed for some pretty pictures and cosmic fairy tales. Teach, Shanks started to warn, but Blackbeard was already moving. You think I'm stupid enough to fall for this? Dark energy began to flow from his body, tendrils of shadow reaching toward the column of light at the chamber's center. Ancient weapon, benevolent entity, whatever you want to call yourself, I know a power grab when I see one. His darkness struck the light and passed right through it, as if the column wasn't really there. Violence will not serve you here, Marshal D. Teach. This space exists beyond the reach of devil fruit powers. Bullshit, Blackbeard snarled, but his darkness was already fading. For the first time since eating the Yami Yami no Mi, his abilities had simply stopped working. Captain, Van Augur called out, raising his rifle. Something's wrong with our powers. Around the chamber, others were making the same discovery. Zoro drew his swords and found them strangely heavy. Sanji tried to ignite his leg and produced only normal flames. Even Luffy's rubber body had reverted to ordinary human flesh. Our abilities are suppressed, Robin observed with scientific curiosity rather than panic. But not removed. I can still feel my devil fruit power, it's just sleeping. A necessary precaution. This conversation requires equality, and devil fruit powers create too much disparity. Here, you are all simply human. Human, Admiral Kizaru mused, flexing his fingers as if surprised by their solidity. How very novel, but Blackbeard wasn't interested in philosophical observations. You're neutralizing our powers to make us helpless. This is exactly what I expected from some ancient. Enough. The voice that cut through his rant wasn't the entity's cosmic whisper. It was Monkey D. Luffy, and it carried a weight of authority that made everyone turn to look at him. Teach, you're being an idiot, Luffy said bluntly. If this thing wanted to hurt us, why would it bother talking? It could have just blown us up the moment we got here. Maybe because it needs us for something. Maybe you should shut up and listen for once in your life. The two Yonko faced each other across the chamber floor, and without their devil fruit powers, the confrontation felt strangely intimate. Just two men, each carrying the weight of their choices. You want to know what I think? Luffy continued. I think you're scared. I think this thing is offering us something you can't steal or destroy or corrupt, and that terrifies you. Blackbeard's face went through several expressions before settling on his characteristic grin. And what exactly is it offering, Straw Hat? What's so tempting that you're ready to trust some disembodied voice in a magic room? Hope, Luffy said simply. The word hit like a physical blow. Around the chamber, hardened pirates and marines alike felt something stir in their chests, something most of them had forgotten they still possessed. Hope, Akainu repeated slowly. When did we stop believing that the world could be better? When we grew up, Buggy muttered, but there was no humor in his voice. When we learned that the strong prey on the weak, and that's just how things are, but it is not how things have to be. Observe, the holographic images changed, showing not idealized visions but harsh realities. Slaves in chains, children starving while nobles feasted, entire islands ground under the heel of corruption and greed. This is your world as it exists now. This is what 8 centuries of incomplete revolution have created. We know, Shanks said quietly, we've all seen it, most of us have lived it. And yet you accept it. You work within its constraints, even as you rebel against its excesses. The pirates among you steal from the corrupt but never question why corruption exists. The Marines among you enforce laws written by those who see justice as a commodity to be bought and sold. The images shifted again, showing the same scenes but subtly different. The slaves were free, the children were fed, the islands prospered under systems that served their people rather than exploiting them. This is what becomes possible when the foundations themselves are changed. Pretty pictures. Doflamingo's voice drifted from somewhere in the chamber, though his physical form remained hidden. But who decides what better means? Who chooses which foundations to change? You do, all of you. That is the point of this gathering, to demonstrate that even natural enemies can find common ground when the stakes are high enough. Common ground. Jesus Burgess looked around at the assembled Marines and pirates. Lady, I don't think you understand how much bad blood there is in this room. He's right, Vice Admiral Doberman spoke up. Half the people here have tried to kill the other half at some point. And yet, Ben Beckman observed, here we are. Not fighting, not plotting against each other, just talking. Because in this space, you see each other as you truly are, not as enemies defined by your uniforms or your flags, but as individuals capable of choice. Nami raised her hand tentatively. I have a question. If you can do all this, suppress devil fruit powers, create interdimensional spaces, show us visions of alternate realities, why do you need us at all? Why not just fix things yourself? Because I am not of your species, navigator of the thousand sunny. I can perceive possibilities, but I cannot choose among them. I can offer power, but I cannot provide wisdom. The world you build must be built by your own hands, guided by your own moral compass, or it will collapse the moment I withdraw my support. So you're offering to be our tool? Zoro asked skeptically. Your partner. Your ally, your friend, if you will permit it. The simplicity of the statement was somehow more profound than any grand declaration could have been. Here was an entity with the power to reshape reality, asking not for worship or obedience, but for friendship. This is insane, Admiral Ryokugiyu muttered. We're talking about overturning 800 years of history based on the word of something we don't even understand. Understanding is overrated, Luffy said cheerfully. I don't understand most of the stuff my crew does, but I trust them anyway. That's different. These are your friends. So were all of you once upon a time. Luffy's expression grew serious. I mean, not you specifically, but people like you, Marines who really believed in justice, pirates who really wanted to be free. We all started with the same dream, we just ended up on different sides. And now, Akainu asked, now maybe we can stop being on different sides. The chamber fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, contemplative rather than tense, hopeful rather than fearful. It was broken by an unexpected voice, Kobe, the young Marine who had somehow found himself in this cosmic gathering despite his relatively low rank. Admiral Akainu, sir. Permission to speak freely? Akainu looked surprised but nodded. Granted. I joined the Marines because I wanted to help people, to make the world safer, more just. Kobe's voice was steady despite his obvious nervousness. But most of what I've done as a Marine, it hasn't felt like helping. It's felt like maintaining a system that hurts more people than it protects. That's treason, Marine, someone called out. No, Akainu said slowly. That's honesty, and maybe it's time we had more of it. He stepped closer to the central column of light. I have spent decades believing that order was more important than justice, that stability was worth any price. But if this entity is telling the truth, he paused, struggling with words that went against everything he'd been taught. If there's really a way to have both justice and order, then perhaps my methods have been wrong. Sakazuki, Fleet Admiral Sengoku's voice carried a note of warning. No, Sengoku, I'm tired of enforcing laws written by people who will never face their consequences. I'm tired of maintaining order for those who profit from chaos. Akainu's magma powers were suppressed, but his conviction burned just as hot. If this alliance can build something better, then I'm willing to try. The impact of his words rippled through the chamber. If someone as rigid and uncompromising as Akainu could consider change, then perhaps change was actually possible. But not everyone was convinced. This is touching and all, a new voice interjected, but you're forgetting something important. The speaker materialized from the shadows, Rob Lucci, somehow present despite having no clear reason to be there. The world government isn't going to just roll over and let you rebuild society. The celestial dragons aren't going to voluntarily give up their power, and there are forces at work that you haven't even considered yet. Explain. Lucci smiled, but there was no humor in it. Operation Crimson Dawn wasn't just about eliminating the Yonko. It was about preparing for something much larger. The five elders have been planning for this day, the day when someone would try to awaken the ancient weapons and use them against the established order. And, Shanks prompted, and they have contingencies you wouldn't believe. Weapons that make ancient artifacts look like children's toys, allies you didn't know existed, powers that… Lucci's smile widened. Well, let's just say this cozy little chat is about to get much more interesting. As if summoned by his words, the chamber's walls began to flicker. The serene space that had held their impossible conversation was starting to destabilize. They are attempting to force our return to normal spacetime. This sanctuary will not hold much longer. Then we need to make a decision, Shanks said urgently. Are we doing this or not? Doing what exactly? Buggy demanded. We still don't know what you're actually proposing. I am proposing that we work together to dismantle the systems that perpetuate suffering and replace them with something worthy of the species that created them. I am proposing that pirates and marines and revolutionaries and kings all set aside their differences long enough to build a world where such divisions are no longer necessary. And if we say no, then you return to your lives and I return to my dreams, and 800 years from now, someone else will have this same conversation. The chamber shook, reality reasserting itself with increasing force. Time's up, Nami observed. We need an answer, now. All eyes turned to the four Yonko, Luffy, Blackbeard, Shanks, and Buggy. Whatever happened next would depend on their decision. Luffy stepped forward without hesitation. I'm in, Shanks nodded. As am I, Buggy hesitated, then shrugged. What the hell? It's not like I had any other plans for the apocalypse. All eyes turned to Blackbeard. The man who had betrayed his crewmates, murdered his way to power, and built an empire on the suffering of others. Marshal D. Teach looked around the chamber one last time, his gaze taking in pirates and marines and cosmic entities alike. Then he started to laugh. Zehahaha, you know what, why not? I've never tried saving the world before, might be fun. Then it is decided. Let us return to your reality and begin the work of building a new one. The chamber dissolved around them, and suddenly they were back in New Marineford, standing in various courtyards and corridors as if no time had passed at all. But everything had changed. The four Yonko alliance had just become something much larger and much more dangerous, a coalition of pirates, marines, and cosmic forces united by a single goal. The world government had awakened something they couldn't control, and somewhere in the depths of Marijua, 5 old men felt the foundations of their power begin to crack. Reality snapped back into focus with the disorienting sensation of diving into cold water. One moment, they had been standing in an impossible chamber discussing the fate of civilization. The next, they were scattered across New Marineford's courtyards with alarms blaring and the taste of cosmic possibility still lingering on their tongues. Luffy blinked, his rubber powers returning like blood flowing back into a sleeping limb. Around him, his crew was shaking off the same disorientation, their abilities flickering back to life. Did that really happen? Chopper asked, his voice small. The interdimensional meeting with a benevolent ancient weapon that wants to help us rebuild society, Robin replied dryly. I certainly hope so, because the alternative is that we've all suffered a collective psychotic break. Luffy, Nami's voice cut through the philosophical discussion. We've got a problem. She was pointing at the sky, where something that definitely hadn't been there before was blotting out the sun. A massive shadow fell across New Marineford as an object the size of a small island descended from orbit, sleek, metallic, and bristling, with weapons that made the fortress's cannons look like children's toys. Ah, the entity's voice whispered in their minds, no longer constrained to transponder snails. It appears the 5 elders have decided to accelerate their timeline. Across the fortress, Blackbeard emerged from the rubble of his battle with Admiral Ryokugiyu, his darkness powers fully restored and his grin wider than ever. Now that's more like it, a proper challenge. That's not a challenge, Van Augur called out, lowering his rifle's scope. That's a flying fortress armed with weapons I can't even identify. Even better, meanwhile, in the western courtyard, Shanks and his crew had regrouped with remarkable efficiency. The red hair pirates moved like a single organism, weapons ready and eyes on the descending threat. Ben, Shanks said quietly, tell me you've seen something like this before. Never, Ben Beckman replied, lighting a cigarette with hands that were perfectly steady. But I can make some educated guesses about what it's capable of. Such as, complete annihilation of everything within a 50-mile radius would be my conservative estimate. Shanks nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable information. And our chances of surviving such an attack? Without help, approximately 0. Good thing we're not without help then. In the ruins of what had once been New Marineford's eastern wing, Buggy was having what could charitably be called a moment of clarity. "I take it back," he shouted at the sky, his body splitting apart in panic. "I don't want to save the world. I want to hide under a rock until this all blows over." "Captain," Alvida said patiently, catching his floating head before it could escape entirely, "I don't think hiding is an option anymore." She was right. Across the fortress, Marines and pirates alike were receiving the same message through emergency transponder snails. A voice that was cultured, ancient, and absolutely devoid of human warmth. "Citizens of the world," the transmission began, "this is Elder Saturn speaking on behalf of the 5 elders and the world government. At approximately 900 hours this morning, a group of terrorist pirates launched an unprovoked attack on Marine headquarters, seeking to steal an ancient weapon of mass destruction." "Terrorist pirates," Usopp squeaked indignantly. "We're not terrorists. We kind of are, though," Frankie pointed out. "I mean, we did blow up half their fortress." In response to this act of aggression, the transmission continued, the world government is implementing Contingency Omega, the complete sterilization of New Marineford and all hostile forces within a 100-kilometer radius. The words hit like physical blows. Even the hardest veterans among both Marines and pirates felt their blood run cold. "Sterilization," Admiral Kizaru repeated slowly. "How very thorough." "They're going to kill everyone," Kobe whispered. "Marines, pirates, civilians, everyone." "Not everyone," Admiral Akainu's voice cut through the growing panic. He stood in the ruins of his office, magma dripping from his clenched fists. "Just everyone who might pose a threat to their absolute authority." "Sir," one of his subordinates looked confused. "What are your orders?" Akainu looked up at the descending orbital platform, then at the mixed crews of pirates and Marines who were all staring at him with something approaching hope. "My orders," he said slowly, "are to protect the innocent and uphold justice." For the first time in decades, those two imperatives actually align. He raised his voice so it would carry across the fortress. "All Marine personnel. Evacuate non-combatants to the underground shelters. Coordinate with pirate crews for maximum efficiency. Our enemy is no longer each other, it's the thing in the sky that wants to kill us all." The response was immediate and chaotic. Marines who had been fighting pirates minutes earlier were now working alongside them to evacuate wounded comrades. Pirate crews who normally showed no mercy were helping Marine medics carry stretchers to safety. "This is insane," Jesus Burgess muttered, but he was helping lift debris off a trapped Marine as he said it. "Insane works," Doc Q replied, treating a Straw Hat pirate's injuries with the same care he'd show his own crew. "Sane got us into this mess." High above the chaos, the orbital platform continued its descent with mechanical precision. Its hull was covered in scripts and symbols that predated any known civilization, not ancient weapons technology, but something older and more terrible. "I recognize those markings," the entity whispered in their collective consciousness. "They are not of this world." "What do you mean?" Robin asked, even as she helped organize evacuation routes with her devil fruit powers. 800 years ago, when Joy Boy and his allies sought to change the world, they faced opposition from more than just human enemies. There were others, visitors from distant stars who had their own plans for this planet. "Aliens?" Chopper's voice climbed 3 octaves. "We're fighting aliens now, not aliens, something worse. Beings who consume entire civilizations, leaving nothing behind but empty worlds and the echoes of what once was. Joy Boy's people managed to drive them away, but it seems they left behind insurance." "Insurance?" Luffy asked, though he was simultaneously stretching his arms to help evacuate civilians from a collapsed building. "A contingency plan, servants bound to their will, tasked with ensuring that this world never becomes strong enough to threaten them again." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. The celestial dragon's inexplicable arrogance. The world government's obsession with maintaining the status quo, the systematic suppression of any technology or philosophy that might unite the world's peoples. "The 5 elders," Shanks breathed, "they're not human. They were once. But they made a bargain 8 centuries ago, immortality and power in exchange for keeping this world weak and divided. And now that we're trying to unite it," Nami began. "Now they have decided that sterilization is preferable to liberation." The orbital platform reached optimal firing position and began to glow with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. Weapon ports opened along its underside, revealing technology that belonged in nightmares rather than reality. "How long do we have?" Ben Beckman asked, his tactical mind already calculating angles and possibilities. 37 minutes until full charge cycle completion. After that, the entity's mental voice carried a weight of ancient sorrow. After that, nothing within the target zone will survive. Then we'd better work fast, Luffy said, and despite everything, the cosmic revelations, the alien influences, the world-ending weapons, his voice carried its usual unshakable confidence. Everyone ready? Ready for what? Buggy demanded. We can't fight that thing, it's in orbit. So we go to orbit, Luffy replied, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. How? Luffy grinned, and for a moment he looked exactly like the carefree pirate who had set sail from East Blue years ago. Easy, we ask nicely. He looked up at the sky, addressing the entity directly. Hey, ancient cosmic friend, think you could give us a lift? It would be my pleasure, Monkey D. Luffy, though I should warn you, what we are about to attempt has never been tried before. Good, Blackbeard's laughter boomed across New Marineford. I was getting bored with ordinary impossibilities. The air around the fortress began to shimmer, reality bending in ways that made eyes water and minds reel. But instead of the clean dimensional shift they'd experienced before, this felt raw, uncontrolled, like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. I am not designed for transportation of physical matter across such distances, the entity admitted, strain evident even in its mental voice. But if we combine our efforts, Admiral Ryokugyu asked, his plasma powers flickering uncertainly. Every devil fruit user among you possesses a connection to the fundamental forces of reality. If you all focus your abilities simultaneously, I may be able to use that resonance to... A pause. The technical term would be catapult you into space. The practical term would be probably fatal. Probably fatal, Usopp's voice had reached a pitch that only dogs could hear. What kind of plan is probably fatal? The best kind, Zoro replied, drawing his swords. Let's do it. Around the fortress, the most dangerous pirates and marines in the world looked up at an alien weapon platform that wanted to erase them from existence, calculated their odds of survival, and came to the same conclusion. They were probably going to die, but they were going to go down fighting. All right, everyone, Luffy called out, his voice carrying across the entire fortress. On my mark, we're going to do something really stupid. More stupid than usual, Sanji asked. Way more stupid than usual. The orbital platform's glow-intensified weapon systems reaching full charge. 36 minutes and counting. Mark, every devil fruit power on New Marineford activated simultaneously, rubber and darkness, light and magma, string and flower petals, all resonating in harmony for the first time in history. The entity wrapped itself around that resonance like a cosmic slingshot, reality groaning under the strain. And then, with a sound like the universe hiccuping, the greatest gathering of pirates and marines in history launched themselves toward an alien weapons platform with nothing but their powers, their weapons, and their absolutely unshakable determination to save the world. It was, as Luffy had promised, really stupid. It was also somehow exactly the right thing to do. Joy Boy would be proud, the entity whispered as they streaked toward the stars, 35 minutes until sterilization. The battle for the future of human civilization was about to begin in earnest. The sensation of being catapulted through the atmosphere by an ancient cosmic entity was, Usopp decided, considerably worse than anything he'd experienced in his nightmares. Which was saying something, considering his nightmares regularly featured sea kings the size of islands and Nami's collection bills. I'm gonna die, he screamed into the void, his voice somehow carrying despite the lack of air. We're all gonna die, Buggy's head replied, having detached from his body somewhere around the stratosphere. This is the STUPIDST plan in the history of stupid plans. ZHAHAHA, Blackbeard's laughter boomed through what should have been vacuum. This is amazing. The rush of acceleration had smoothed out into a strange, weightless glide as they approached the orbital platform. Around them, the curve of the planet spread out in blues and greens and whites, beautiful beyond description and utterly irrelevant to their current situation. I am maintaining a localized atmosphere around each of you, the entity explained, its mental voice much calmer than anyone else's. You should be able to breathe and speak normally, though I cannot guarantee the same for complex devil fruit interactions. Define complex, Robin requested, her multiple arms already adapting to the zero-gravity environment with typical efficiency. Anything involving combustion, electrical discharge, or manipulation of atmospheric pressure may behave unpredictably. Sanji's leg burst into flames, then immediately extinguished itself, then reignited in a completely different color. Well, that's not ominous at all. Less talking, more preparing, Shanks called out, somehow managing to look dignified even while floating upside down relative to everyone else. That thing's getting bigger fast. The orbital platform loomed ahead of them like a mechanical moon, all angles and edges and surfaces that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. Weapon ports dotted its hull like malevolent eyes. each one larger than the thousand sunny and crackling with energy that made the air, such as it was, taste of copper and ozone. Defensive positions, Admiral Akainu barked, his magma powers creating brief jets of propulsion that let him maneuver in the weightless environment. Spread out. Don't give them a concentrated target. Since when do you give orders to pirates? Jesus Burgess demanded, though he was already following the instruction. Since we're all on the same side, Akainu shot back. At least until we survive this. The platform's weapon systems locked onto their approaching group with mechanical precision. Warning lights began flashing along its hull, not the red of human technology, but a sickly green that seemed to crawl into the brain through the optic nerve. Incoming, Van Augur called out, his sniper's instincts translating perfectly to three-dimensional space. Multiple targeting systems activating. The first barrage erupted from the platform's surface like a solar flare given malevolent purpose. Beams of energy that weren't quite light and weren't quite plasma lanced toward them with impossible accuracy. Scatter, Luffy yelled, then immediately contradicted his own order by stretching his body into a massive net. Everyone behind me! Luffy, no, Nami screamed, but it was too late. The energy beams struck Luffy's expanded form and bounced. Not perfectly, some of the energy was absorbed, leaving smoking holes in his rubber body, but enough deflected away to save the others from instant vaporization. Rubber works in space, he announced cheerfully, even as Doc Q began treating his burns. Who knew? Basic physics, Robin replied dryly, though I admit the energy absorption properties are fascinating. Save the science lesson, Zoro called out, using his swords to deflect a smaller beam that had gotten through Luffy's defense. We need to get inside that thing. Easier said than done, Ben Beckman observed, lighting a cigarette that somehow burned perfectly in the void. I count at least 50 weapon emplacements, and that's just on the side facing us. Then we make our own entrance, Blackbeard grinned, darkness beginning to flow from his body in ways that defied both physics and common sense. Dark fruit, event horizon. The sphere of absolute nothingness that materialized around him was smaller than usual, the entity's atmospheric manipulation interfering with his powers, but still devastating. It pulled in energy beams, debris, and anything else unfortunate enough to come within its reach. Now, he roared, launching himself toward the platform. While I've got their attention, the others followed, each adapting to space combat in their own unique way. Shanks used precise sword strikes to deflect incoming fire. Admiral Ryokugiyu's plasma powers created brief but effective shields. Even Buggy's tendency to fall apart randomly proved useful in zero gravity, making him nearly impossible to target effectively. But as they closed the distance to the platform's hull, the real defenses activated. The surface of the massive construct began to shift and flow like liquid metal, forming shapes that were disturbingly organic despite their obviously artificial origin. Gun ports became mouths filled with crystalline teeth. Sensor arrays sprouted tentacles that crackled with bioelectric energy. Hull plating rippled and flexed like muscle tissue. Okay, Frankie said weakly, that's super not normal. Nanotechnology merged with biological components, the entity explained with what might have been distaste. The beings who created this were fond of such combinations. One of the tentacles lashed out toward them, moving with impossible speed and precision. Admiral Kizaru intercepted it with a beam of light, but instead of being destroyed, the appendage simply absorbed the energy and grew larger. It's adaptive, Robin called out. The more we attack it, the stronger it gets. Then we don't attack it, Luffy said with characteristic simplicity. We go around it. Around a space station the size of an island, Nami asked incredulously. Yep, gomu no. Luffy began stretching, his body extending in multiple directions at once. UFO, his arms and legs wrapped around the platform's hull like rubber bands, pulling his crew members along for the ride. They swung around the construct's circumference at breakneck speed, dodging tentacles and energy beams with the kind of reckless precision that only worked when Luffy was at his most instinctively brilliant. There, Chopper pointed with a hoof at what looked like a maintenance hatch. That looks like a way in. That looks like a trap, Zoro corrected. Everything looks like a trap, Buggy wailed. Because everything is a trap. Sometimes you have to walk into the trap, Shanks observed, already drawing his sword. The trick is walking out again. They landed on the platform's hull with various degrees of grace, Sanji and catastrophe, Buggy, their boots somehow finding purchase on the alien metal despite the lack of gravity. Magnetic field, Robin observed, studying the way their feet stuck to the surface. The hull is generating artificial gravity. Clever. Diabolical, Usopp corrected. Definitely diabolical. The maintenance hatch was sealed with technology that predated human civilization, but it turned out that ancient alien locks were no match for Zoro's swords, Luffy's fists, and Blackbeard's darkness used in combination. "After you," Akainu said politely, gesturing toward the now open entrance. "How very courteous," Shanks replied with equal politeness. "Age before beauty. I'm younger than you are. Are you sure about that?" Their casual banter while standing on the hull of an alien weapons platform somehow made the entire situation feel less surreal. Just pirates and marines doing what they did best, making jokes in the face of almost certain death. The interior of the platform was worse than the exterior. Corridors that twisted in directions that shouldn't exist. Walls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that made eyes water and thoughts stutter. Air that tasted of metal and ozone and something organic that nobody wanted to identify. "Stay together," Admiral Akainu ordered, then paused. "Please, I'm asking, not ordering." "Appreciated," Luffy replied seriously. "Which way to the control room?" "The central core is 17 levels down and 3 dimensions to the left," the entity provided helpfully. 3 dimensions to the left?" Nami asked weakly. "Non-Euclidean architecture. I can guide you, but the journey may be disorienting." "More disorienting than everything else that's happened today?" Frankie asked. "Considerably." They began moving deeper into the platform, following corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when nobody was looking directly at them. The artificial gravity shifted randomly. Sometimes they walked on walls, sometimes on ceilings, occasionally on surfaces that physics insisted couldn't support weight. "I hate this place," Chopper muttered, his enhanced senses overwhelmed by smells and sounds that had no earthly equivalent. "It hates you too," Doc Q replied conversationally. "I can feel it. The entire structure is hostile to organic life." "Great," Buggy said. "We're inside something that wants to kill us, heading towards something that definitely wants to kill us, with no way out except through something that absolutely wants to kill us." "Sounds like Tuesday," Zoro observed. They were halfway to their destination when the platform's defenses finally located them. The first sign was a sound like crystalline wind chimes mixed with grinding metal. The second was the way the corridor walls began bleeding a luminescent fluid that moved with obvious intelligence. "Contact," Van Augur called out, raising his rifle. Multiple hostiles approaching from all directions. The things that emerged from the walls defied easy description. Part machine, part organism, part pure malevolence given form. They moved like liquid mercury but struck like sledgehammers, adapting their attack patterns in real time based on their opponent's defenses. "Spread out," Shanks commanded. "Don't let them surround us." The battle in the alien corridor was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. Their devil fruit powers worked, but differently. Luffy's rubber was more elastic, Blackbeard's darkness seemed deeper, and Sanji's fire burned with colors that didn't have names. "The platform is enhancing our abilities," Robin realized, even as she created dozens of arms to fend off attackers. "But it's also learning from them." She was right. Each time someone used their powers, the hostile entities adapted a little more. Energy attacks became less effective. Physical strikes met with increased resistance. Even hockey seemed muted by the alien technology. "We can't keep this up," Ben Beckman called out, his rifle shots becoming less accurate as the enemies learned to predict his targeting patterns. "Then we don't keep it up," Luffy said, making a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. "Everyone grab onto me." "Why?" Nami demanded, even as she complied. "Because we're going to do something really, really stupid." Before anyone could ask what that meant, Luffy activated Gear 4th and inflated to his maximum size, then launched himself directly at the nearest wall with everyone clinging to his expanded form. They crashed through alien metal and circuitry like a rubber cannonball, emerging into a vast chamber that stretched away in all directions. At its center, suspended in a web of energy conduits and organic tubing, was something that might once have been human. "Welcome," it said in a voice like grinding glass, "to the heart of my domain. I have been waiting so long to meet you." The thing that had once been one of the 5 elders smiled with too many teeth, and the countdown to planetary sterilization entered its final 10 minutes. The thing that had once been Elder Saturn hung suspended in the center of the vast chamber like a grotesque spider in a web of alien technology. Cables and tubes ran from its body into the platform systems, pulsing with bioluminescent fluid that seemed to move with its own terrible awareness. What remained of its human features were stretched and distorted, enhanced with mechanical components that clicked and whirred with each breath. "Do you like what I've become?" it asked, its voice a harmonious blend of human speech and electronic static. 800 years of service to our benefactors has its rewards. You're disgusting, Chopper said with unusual vehemence for the gentle doctor. What did they do to you? They perfected me. Saturn's augmented eyes focused on the assembled pirates and marines with unblinking intensity. Freed me from the limitations of mortality, the weaknesses of flesh, the burden of conscience. Burden? Admiral Akainu stepped forward, magma beginning to drip from his clenched fists. Conscience isn't a burden, it's what makes us human. Human, the word came out like a curse. Such a limiting concept. Our masters showed us what we could become if we abandoned such primitive notions. Your masters, the entity's voice resonated through the chamber, are parasites who consume entire civilizations for sustenance. They showed you nothing but how to be their willing slaves. Saturn's mechanical laughter was like grinding gears. Slaves, we are partners in the greatest enterprise the universe has ever known, the cultivation of suffering for the nourishment of gods. That's sick, Luffy said flatly. And I'm gonna stop you. You cannot stop what has already begun, Monkey D. Luffy. The sterilization sequence has passed the point of no return. In 8 minutes and 37 seconds, every living thing on the planet below will be reduced to its component atoms. Wanna bet? Luffy cracked his knuckles and began to expand. Gear forth, bounce man. He launched himself at Saturn with enough force to crack the chamber walls, but the Elder moved faster than anything that size should have been able to. Mechanical limbs extended from its torso, catching Luffy's attack and redirecting it into the nearest energy conduit. Impressive, but futile, I am integrated with this entire platform. Every system, every weapon, every defensive measure, they are all extensions of my will. The chamber around them began to shift and flow, walls becoming weapons, floors becoming traps. Energy beams lanced down from the ceiling while mechanical tentacles erupted from the deck plating. Scatter! Shanks commanded, his sword already in motion to deflect a beam that would have taken Buggy's head off. The battle that followed was unlike anything they had experienced. This wasn't just fighting an opponent, it was fighting an entire environment that adapted and evolved with each passing second. Every surface was potentially hostile, every shadow might conceal a trap. Blackbeard's darkness pulled in energy attacks, but the platform simply rerouted power through different conduits. Zoro's swords cut through mechanical limbs, only for new ones to grow from the stumps. Even Akainu's magma, which could melt through almost anything, seemed to have minimal effect on the alien metallurgy. It's learning from us, Robin called out, creating multiple arms to shield herself from a barrage of crystal projectiles. Every technique we use, it develops a counter. Then we need to use something it can't counter, Ben Beckman replied, reloading his rifle with ammunition that definitely wasn't standard issue. Such as, Nami demanded, navigating the shifting terrain with her Klimattact spinning to deflect attacks. Teamwork. The word came from an unexpected source, Admiral Ryo Kugiyu, who had been quietly observing the battle while his plasma powers held off a section of hostile machinery. Explain, Shanks said, parrying a mechanical limb that tried to impale him. It's adapting to individual techniques, Ryo Kugiyu continued, his plasma forming complex defensive patterns. But what if we combined our abilities in ways it's never seen before? Combination attacks, Sanji's eyes lit up with understanding. Like the old days with the crew, but bigger. Much bigger, Luffy grinned, dodging another of Saturn's strikes. Everyone ready to try something crazy? Define crazy, Usopp called out from behind an overturned piece of machinery. All of us attacking at once, but in perfect coordination. That's not crazy, Buggy protested, his detached head floating safely away from the main battle. That's impossible, not impossible, the entity whispered in their minds. I can provide the synchronization you need, but it will require absolute trust in each other and in me. For a moment, the chamber fell silent except for the hum of alien machinery and Saturn's mechanical breathing. Do it, Akainu said without hesitation. You sure? Zoro asked, surprised by the Admiral's immediate agreement. I've spent my entire career trusting the wrong people, Akainu replied grimly. Time to try trusting the right ones. Then focus your abilities on my guidance. Feel the resonance between your powers and let it flow through me. What happened next was impossible to describe in conventional terms. Every devil fruit user in the chamber felt their power connect to something larger, not just the entity's cosmic awareness, but each other's abilities. Rubber and darkness, light and magma, string and flowers, all becoming part of a single, unified force. Luffy's body stretched, but this time it carried traces of Blackbeard's gravity manipulation. Akainu's magma erupted, but it moved with the precision of Shanks' sword techniques. Even non-devil fruit users found their abilities enhanced. Zoro's swords hummed with energy borrowed from Ryokugiyu's plasma, while Ben Beckman's bullets carried fragments of Robin's tactical awareness. "What is this?" Saturn demanded, its mechanical components sparking as it tried to process the impossible data streams its sensors were providing. "This," Luffy said, his voice carrying harmonics from all the others, "is what it looks like when enemies become friends." The combined attack struck Saturn like a force of nature. Not just physical damage, but something deeper. The coordinated assault of dozens of different abilities working in perfect harmony, guided by an intelligence that spanned dimensions and informed by the collective will of pirates and marines who had chosen cooperation over conflict. Saturn's integrated systems began to overload. Warning klaxons blared throughout the chamber as alien technology that had operated flawlessly for centuries started to break down under the strain of processing, something it had never been designed to handle. "Impossible!" Saturn shrieked, its augmented form beginning to smoke and spark. "The Masters prepared us for every contingency." "Except friendship," Chopper said quietly, his medical instincts helping him understand what was happening to their enemy. "They didn't prepare you for that." The Elder's mechanical components were failing, but instead of shutting down, they seemed to be reverting. Alien enhancements fell away like shed skin, revealing something that was startlingly, recognizably human underneath. "What's happening to him?" Nami asked. "The alien influence is being purged," the entity explained. "Your unified attack didn't just damage the technology, it severed his connection to his masters. He's becoming human again." Saturn, no, the man who had once been Saturn, collapsed to the chamber floor, his augmented limbs going limp. When he looked up, his eyes were clear for the first time in centuries. "What have I done?" he whispered, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. 800 years of being controlled by something that wanted to destroy everything you were, Akainu said, surprising everyone with his gentleness. "It wasn't your fault, but the sterilization protocol is still active," Van Augur observed, checking his chronometer. 4 minutes and counting. The former elder struggled to his feet, his movements unsteady without his mechanical enhancements. "The command codes, they're integrated into my neural patterns. Without the alien augmentations, I can't access them." "So we can't shut it down?" Frankie asked. "I can't, but..." He looked up at the entity's presence, somehow sensing it even without technological enhancement. "You might be able to if you can interface with the platform's core systems." "I can try, but I will need a conduit, someone to serve as a bridge between my consciousness and the platform's alien technology." "I'll do it," Luffy said immediately. "Luffy, no," Nami protested. "You don't know what that might do to you. Don't care, everyone's counting on us. The process will be intense. Your mind will be temporarily merged with mine and with the platform's consciousness. The experience may change you in ways I cannot predict." Luffy grinned. "Sounds fun." Before anyone could stop him, he reached out and touched one of the central interface nodes. Energy coursed through his body, and his eyes rolled back as consciousness exploded outward into spaces that had no names. For a moment that lasted eternity, Monkey D. Luffy became something more than human. He saw the universe from the perspective of a cosmic entity, felt the alien hunger that had driven the platform's creators, understood the terrible loneliness of being the last of his kind. He also felt the love and determination of his crew, the grudging respect of former enemies, the hope of an entire world that depended on them. With that understanding came power, the ability to reach into the platform's core systems and speak to them in their own language. "Hey," he said to the alien consciousness that controlled the sterilization protocol. "Time to stop." The response was immediate and absolute. Throughout the platform, weapon systems powered down. The countdown to planetary destruction ceased with 3 minutes and 17 seconds remaining. Luffy opened his eyes and grinned at his friends. "Did it work?" The answer came in the form of cheers, applause, and what was definitely Ben Beckman crying, though he would deny it for the rest of his life. They had done it. The greatest alliance in pirate history had just saved the world. But as they would soon discover, saving the world was only the beginning of their real work. The silence that followed their victory was perhaps more unsettling than any of the battles that had preceded it. The alien platform hung dead in space around them, its corridors now lit only by emergency power that cast everything in an eerie red glow. Without the constant hum of weapon systems and hostile machinery, their own breathing seemed unnaturally loud. "So," Buggy said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber, "what now?" It was a simple question with extraordinarily complicated implications. They had saved the world, yes, but they had also committed themselves to rebuilding it. And as the adrenaline of victory began to fade, the magnitude of that commitment was becoming clear. "Now we go home," Luffy said, but even his usual confidence seemed subdued. "And we figure out how to keep our promise." The former Elder Saturn, he had given them his original name, Jagarsha, during the quiet moments after the battle, sat slumped against a disabled console, still struggling to process 8 centuries of recovered memories. "The other elders," he said suddenly, "they'll know what happened here, they'll be preparing countermeasures." "Let them prepare," Admiral Akainu replied grimly. "We have something they don't, which is each other." It was a simple statement, but coming from someone who had spent decades believing that strength meant standing alone, it carried unexpected weight. "The return journey will be less traumatic than our ascent," the entity informed them. "I can create a controlled descent using the platform's own transportation systems." "Transportation systems?" Robin looked around the dead machinery with professional interest. "I don't see any shuttle bays or, you are thinking in terms of mechanical conveyance. Observe." The chamber around them began to shift, but gently this time. The floor beneath their feet became transparent, revealing the blue marble of their world far below. Energy flowed along the walls in patterns that were almost hypnotically beautiful. "This platform was designed for instantaneous matter transmission. I am simply repurposing its systems for a more gradual descent." "Teleportation?" Nami asked nervously. "I've had enough of impossible transportation methods for one day. Not teleportation, dimensional folding. The space between here and the surface will simply become smaller." Before anyone could ask what that meant, the stars outside began to move. Not quickly, but with obvious purpose, as if the universe itself was rotating around them. The sensation was indescribable, like falling upward while standing perfectly still. "I think I'm going to be sick," Chopper moaned. "Join the club," Usopp replied weakly, but Luffy was grinning as he watched the world grow larger below them. "This is amazing. It's like the whole universe is moving just for us." "That's because it is," Jagarsha said quietly. "Your entity friend isn't just manipulating space, it's temporarily making this platform the center of local reality. Everything else moves relative to us." "Is that safe?" Sanji asked, though he was lighting a cigarette with hands that were perfectly steady. "Define safe, for you, completely. For the fabric of spacetime, there may be some minor ripple effects." "What kind of ripple effects?" Robin pressed. "Nothing catastrophic. A few small temporal anomalies, perhaps some gravitational hiccups. The sort of thing that tends to work itself out over a few decades." "Decades?" Admiral Ryokugiyu looked concerned. "Give or take a century, time is quite flexible when you know how to bend it properly." Van Augur lowered his rifle scope from where he'd been studying the approaching planet. "Boss, we've got a problem. There are ships moving to intercept us." "World government?" Shanks asked. "Some of them, but also," Van Augur paused, adjusting his scope's focus. "Revolutionary Army, Marine defectors. Even some ships I don't recognize." Word travels quickly. The entire world felt the resonance of our battle, every transponder snail, every communication system briefly connected to something larger. "They know what happened here. They know we won," Luffy said with satisfaction. "They know the old order is ending. Whether they see that as victory or catastrophe depends on which side of that order they were on." As they descended through the atmosphere, the approaching flotilla became visible to the naked eye. Hundreds of ships representing every faction and philosophy on the planet, all converging on their landing site. "This could get complicated," Ben Beckman observed, lighting a fresh cigarette from the ember of his previous one. "Complicated is our specialty," Zoro replied, hand resting casually on his sword hilts. They landed on the beach of the same nameless island where their alliance had first formed, though it looked different now. The sand had been fused into glass in places, and strange flowers were growing in patterns that definitely hadn't been there before. "Minor dimensional bleed-through," the entity explained. "Your reality is a bit more flexible now. You may notice some interesting side effects over the next few years." The first ship to reach the beach carried a delegation that made everyone pause. Revolutionary Army leaders standing next to Marine vice admirals, pirate captains sharing space with world government officials who had apparently decided that surviving the apocalypse was more important than protocol. "Well," Dragon said as he stepped onto the crystalline sand, "this is certainly unprecedented." "Father," Luffy called out cheerfully, apparently unfazed by the cosmic implications of what they'd just accomplished. "Son," Dragon's usual stoic expression cracked slightly. "I'm proud of you, all of you." "Don't get sentimental yet," Admiral Tsuru warned, though she didn't look particularly threatening. "We still have a world to rebuild, and most of us have no idea where to start." We start with the obvious stuff, Luffy said, sitting down on a piece of crystallized driftwood. No more slaves, no more celestial dragons. No more people starving while other people have more food than they can eat. The economic implications alone, someone from the World Government delegation began, are irrelevant, Akainu interrupted. Economics serve people, not the other way around. The gathering fell silent. If Sakazuki Akainu was questioning the fundamental assumptions of capitalism, then truly nothing would ever be the same. So we're really doing this, Sengoku said, stepping out from behind a group of marine officers. We're actually going to try to build a better world. We're going to succeed, Shanks corrected. Because for the first time in 800 years, we're all working toward the same goal. And what goal is that? Asked a voice from the crowd. Everyone turned to see who had spoken, but it was impossible to identify the source. The question seemed to come from everyone and no one. It was answered by the most unlikely person imaginable. Freedom, Buggy said, his usual cowardice replaced by something that might have been wisdom. Real freedom. Not the kind where you're free to be crushed by people stronger than you, but the kind where everyone gets to choose their own path. Freedom and justice, Akainu added. Freedom and adventure, Luffy chimed in. Freedom and knowledge, Robin contributed. Freedom and responsibility, Jagarsha said quietly, the former elder's voice carrying the weight of 8 centuries of regret. Freedom and growth, the entity added, its mental voice somehow including everyone present. The freedom to become more than you were, constrained only by your willingness to help others do the same. Over the next several hours, as more ships arrived and the gathering grew to include representatives from every corner of the world, the basic framework of their new society began to take shape. Not through grand proclamations or formal treaties, but through hundreds of small conversations between people who had never spoken as equals before. Pirates shared their knowledge of navigation with Marines who had spent careers hunting them. Revolutionary Army theorists debated policy with world government economists who were seeing their assumptions challenged for the first time. Scholars exchanged ideas with warriors, nobles conversed with commoners, and slowly, gradually, a new understanding began to emerge. It's working, Nami observed, watching a group of former enemies collaborating on plans for a new trade system that would benefit everyone instead of enriching a few. It's amazing, Chopper added, his medical bag open as he treated injuries without regard for which side anyone had been on. It's terrifying, Usopp admitted. What if we mess it up? What if we build something worse than what we tore down? Then we'll fix it, Luffy said simply, and keep fixing it until we get it right. As the sun began to set over the impossible gathering, casting long shadows across crystallized sand and flowering patterns that shouldn't exist, one thing became clear. They had not just saved the world, they had given it the chance to become something better. Joy Boy would be proud, the entity whispered, its voice barely audible above the sound of thousands of people working together for the first time in history. But even as they celebrated their victory and planned their future, none of them noticed the small group of figures watching from the shadows of a distant cliff. The remaining 4 elders, their alien augmentations fully activated, their eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. They think they have won, one of them said in a voice like grinding metal. Let them think so, another replied. The masters have been patient for 8 centuries. They can be patient a little longer. The 3rd elder activated a communication device that was definitely not of terrestrial origin. Phase 2 is now authorized. Begin awakening the sleepers. And in hidden facilities around the world, things that had been dormant since the Void Century began to stir. The battle for Earth's future was far from over. 3 months after the Battle of New Marineford, as history would remember it, the world had begun to look fundamentally different. The Sabaody archipelago, once a hub of human trafficking and systemic cruelty, had been transformed into something that would have been unimaginable under the old order. The auction houses where slaves were sold now served as schools and hospitals. The lawless areas where pirates and marines had fought endless skirmishes had become centers of cooperation, where former enemies worked side by side to build something better. Luffy stood on the deck of the Thousand Sunny, watching the activity on the docks below. Ships flew flags he'd never seen before, not the Jolly Rogers of pirates or the seagull insignia of the Marines, but new symbols representing the dozens of autonomous regions that had formed as the world government's centralized authority crumbled. Penny for your thoughts, Robin asked, joining him at the rail. Just thinking about how different everything looks, Luffy replied. It's good different, but different. Having regrets? No way, Luffy's trademark grin returned in full force. This is exactly what we wanted. Everyone's free to choose their own adventure now. And what adventure are we choosing? Before Luffy could answer, the transponder snail network crackled to life with an emergency broadcast that reached every corner of the world simultaneously. Citizens of the New World Order, the entity's now familiar voice resonated through every communication device on the planet. I regret to inform you that our work is not yet complete. The remaining architects of the old system have activated what they call Phase 2. Across Sabaody, people stopped what they were doing to listen. In the reconstructed marine bases, former admirals paused in their discussions of justice reform. On pirate ships that now served as exploration vessels, crews gathered around their transponder snails. Hidden facilities around the world are releasing entities that have slumbered since the Void Century, beings created by the same alien intelligence that once influenced the Five Elders. They are awakening with a single purpose: to restore the old order by eliminating anyone who might resist it. The broadcast was interrupted by a sound that made everyone's blood freeze, a roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once, carrying notes of hunger and malevolence that spoke to something primal in the human brain. That came from the south, Nami observed, her navigator's instincts automatically tracking the sound's origin. And there, Zoro added, pointing northeast where a column of unnatural smoke was rising from what had been Water 7. And there, Sanji said grimly, indicating another disturbance on the horizon. Across the world, similar scenes were playing out. Ancient facilities that predated human civilization were opening like malevolent flowers, releasing things that should have remained buried. The transponder snail network crackled back to life, but this time the voice was different, cultured, ancient, and absolutely without warmth. "Did you really think," Elder Mars said, his words carrying to every corner of the globe, "that 8 centuries of preparation would be undone by a few months of idealistic cooperation?" On Laugh-Tale, where the remnants of the world government had established their final stronghold, the remaining 4 elders stood in a chamber that was clearly not of human construction. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, and the air itself seemed to thicken with malevolent intelligence. "Phase 2 was always our true contingency," Elder Jupiter continued. "The Yonko alliance, the destruction of our orbital platform, even the loss of Saturn, all acceptable sacrifices to lower your guard. You have spent 3 months believing you had won," Elder Venus added. 3 months building a new society, establishing new relationships, learning to trust former enemies. How very vulnerable that makes you. The final Elder Warcury raised his hand, and across the world, the awakened entities received their orders simultaneously. Destroy the symbols of their new order. Kill the leaders of their revolution. Show them that cooperation is weakness and that only absolute authority can provide true stability. The attack began immediately. On Sabaody, the first creature emerged from the mangrove roots like a nightmare given physical form. Part machine, part organic horror, all malevolent purpose. It was the size of a building but moved with the fluid grace of a predator, its multiple eyes scanning for targets with mechanical precision. "Everyone off the docks," Admiral Akainu's voice boomed across the archipelago. He stood on the roof of what had once been the marine base, his magma powers already active. "Civilian evacuation protocols are in effect." "Since when do we have civilian evacuation protocols?" someone called out. "Since we decided that protecting people was more important than following regulations." Akainu shot back, launching a massive fist of molten rock at the approaching creature. The attack struck home, but instead of being destroyed, the entity simply absorbed the magma and grew larger. "It's adaptive," Dr. Vegapunk's voice crackled over the emergency frequency. "These things learn from every attack. Traditional combat methods will be ineffective." "Then we don't use traditional methods," Shanks replied, his voice carrying from wherever the Red Force had anchored. "We use the same thing that worked against their platform. Cooperation," Luffy said, understanding immediately. "Everyone working together instead of fighting alone." "Easier said than done," Blackbeard's laugh boomed across the network. "These things are attacking every population center simultaneously. We can't be everywhere at once." "You don't need to be," the entity interjected. "You just need to be connected." "Connected how?" Robin asked, even as she used her devil fruit powers to help evacuate civilians from the creature's path. "The same way we merged your abilities in space, but on a planetary scale." The implications of that statement sent chills through everyone listening. A planetary-scale merger of abilities would require every person with enhanced powers to trust not just each other, but an entity they still didn't fully understand. The risks, Vegapunk began, are considerable. This has never been attempted before. The psychological strain alone could be devastating. But if it works, Luffy asked. If it works, we can create a global defense network powered by human cooperation. Every devil fruit user, every Haki practitioner, every person with enhanced abilities, all working as a single organism to protect your new world. The creature on Sabaody chose that moment to demonstrate exactly what they were fighting against. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of crystalline teeth, and it released a sound that shattered windows across 3 groves and sent most of the nearby population fleeing in terror. "I'm in," Luffy said immediately. "Same," Zoro agreed. "If the captain's in, we're all in," Nami added, speaking for the entire Straw Hat crew. "Red Hair Pirates accept," Shanks confirmed. "Zehahaha, this should be interesting," Blackbeard laughed. "Count us in too." "The Reformed Marine Corps agrees to participate," Akainu announced formally. "Revolutionary Army confirms," Dragon's voice added. One by one, voices from around the world joined the chorus of agreement. Pirates who had spent their lives trusting no one, Marines who had been taught that cooperation was weakness, revolutionaries who believed that all authority was corrupt. All of them choosing to trust each other and an ancient entity because the alternative was watching their new world burn. Then let us begin. Focus your abilities not outward but inward. Feel the connection between your power and your humanity. Let that connection expand until it touches others. What happened next was impossible to describe in conventional terms. Across the planet, thousands of individuals felt their consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of their bodies. Devil fruit users found their powers resonating with others they'd never met. Haki practitioners felt their will connecting to a vast network of similar determination. On Sabaody, Luffy's rubber powers suddenly carried traces of Akainu's magma control and Shanks' sword precision. The creature that had been steadily growing stronger with each attack it absorbed suddenly found itself facing an opponent whose abilities couldn't be predicted or countered because they were constantly changing. Similar scenes played out across the world. In Water 7, where another entity was attacking the rebuilt city, Blackbeard's darkness merged with the construction abilities of the Galila foremen and the tactical genius of Revolutionary Army strategists. The creature found itself trapped in shadows that could build, in constructions that could think, in strategies that adapted faster than it could counter. On Fishman Island, where a third entity threatened the fragile peace between surface and sea, the combined powers of Jimbei's Fishman Karate and the technological innovations of Dr. Vegapunk created defenses that turned the creature's own strength against it. The global defense network lasted exactly 17 minutes, but 17 minutes was enough. When the last of the ancient entities had been either destroyed or driven back into dormancy, the network dissolved, leaving its participants exhausted but victorious. More importantly, it left them with something they'd never had before, absolute proof that cooperation worked better than conflict. "It is done," the entity announced to the world. "The last weapons of the old order have been neutralized. The future is truly yours to build now." On Laughtail, in the chamber that was definitely not of human construction, the 4 elders stared at readings that should have been impossible. Every single one of their ancient weapons had been defeated. More than defeated, they had been turned into power sources for the very society they were meant to destroy. "This is unacceptable," Elder Mars said, his alien augmentations sparking with rage. "The masters will not be pleased," Jupiter agreed. "Then perhaps," a new voice said from the chamber's entrance, "it's time to stop serving masters who see you as disposable." The elders turned to see Jagarsha Saturn walking toward them, but he was not alone. Behind him came figures they recognized, Marines and pirates and revolutionaries who had somehow infiltrated their final stronghold. "You," Warcury snarled, "traitor to your own species." "I was a traitor when I served them," Jagarsha replied calmly. "Now I'm just human." The battle that followed was brief but decisive. The 4 elders, for all their alien enhancements and centuries of accumulated power, discovered that they could not stand against opponents who were willing to sacrifice for each other rather than sacrificing each other. When it was over, the chamber fell silent except for the sound of alien technology powering down forever. "So," Elder Mars said weakly, his augmentations failing as his connection to his alien masters was severed, "what happens to us now?" "Now," Admiral Akainu said, stepping into the chamber, "you get the chance to remember what it means to be human. Just like Jagarsha did. And if we refuse, then you'll spend the rest of your hopefully very long lives in a very comfortable prison, being cared for by people you spent centuries oppressing." Akainu's smile was genuinely warm for perhaps the first time in decades. Either way, you're done hurting people. 6 months later, the Thousand Sunny sailed through waters that sparkled with colors that had never existed before the entity's influence began changing their world. The ship's crew had grown, not just in number, but in purpose. "So where to next, Captain?" Nami asked, plotting a course through seas that seemed to rearrange themselves just to provide more interesting adventures. "Everywhere," Luffy replied, his grin as wide as the horizon. "The whole world's open now. No more barriers, no more forbidden zones. We can go anywhere, meet anyone, have any adventure we want." "And the Alliance?" Robin asked. "The reformed Marines, the converted pirates, the new revolutionaries. They don't need us to hold their hands anymore." Shank's voice came through the transponder snail. "They've got their own adventures to have. Besides," Blackbeard added with his characteristic laugh, "some of us prefer our freedom in smaller groups. Less chance of anyone getting ideas about cooperation and mutual respect." "You say that," Buggy's voice chimed in, "but I notice you helped evacuate those civilians on Drum Island last week." "That was different." "They had good food." "Sure it was," Buggy replied, but his tone was fond rather than mocking. "The network remains," the entity added, its mental voice now a welcome presence rather than an alien intrusion. "Not active, but available. Should you ever need to work together again, the pathways are established." "Good to know," Luffy said, "but for now I think we've had enough of saving the world. Time for some normal adventures." "Normal?" Usopp laughed. "Luffy, nothing about our adventures has ever been normal. Even better." As the Thousand Sunny sailed toward the horizon, other ships scattered across the transformed seas. The Red Force headed north, toward islands that now flew flags of genuine freedom. Blackbeard's crew sailed south, seeking challenges worthy of their dark powers in a world where such challenges could be faced without devastating consequences. Even Buggy's crew had found their purpose, establishing a delivery service that connected the world's scattered communities with reliable, if occasionally accidental, efficiency. The reformed Marines maintained bases around the world, but their mission had changed from enforcement to assistance. The new revolutionaries worked openly now, helping communities transition from the old systems to whatever they chose to build in their place. And in the spaces between all these adventures, in the quiet moments between grand quests and epic battles, ordinary people lived ordinary lives in ways that would have been impossible under the old order. Joy Boy's dream is finally realized, the entity observed as night fell over the transformed world. A planet where strength serves others rather than subjugating them, where difference is celebrated rather than feared, where the only limit to growth is imagination. "Think it'll last?" Luffy asked, watching the stars that seemed to shine a little brighter now. "Nothing lasts forever, but this world has something the old one never had, the knowledge that cooperation works. That may be enough to ensure that whatever comes next is built on better foundations than what came before." Somewhere in the distance, lightning flashed in colors that had no names, and the sea itself seemed to laugh with joy. The age of the Yonko was over. The age of adventure had just begun. And in the vast spaces between stars, ancient intelligences that had once viewed Earth as a resource to be harvested turned their attention to other worlds, other systems, other species that might be easier to control than humans who had learned to work together. They would find no such species. Cooperation, it turned out, was contagious. And Monkey D. Luffy's laughter echoed across dimensions, carrying with it the promise that no matter how far they spread their wings, the children of the dawn would never stop flying. So there we have it, from a simple alliance to saving humanity itself. Luffy didn't just become Pirate King, he helped rebuild the entire world. Even Blackbeard ended up being a hero, sort of. What hit you the most? The cosmic entity twist, Akainu's redemption arc, Buggy accidentally becoming important to world history. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for reading this wild ride with me. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Until next time.